All right, good morning and welcome back to the Game Dev Show. I'm here with Powell, Jason Story, Dave, and Greg, and we're going to be talking about just random game dev topics. I think there's a new game that Story's been playing that seems to be blowing up on the internet. I just saw the insane amount of overviews. So probably talk a little bit about that, and I'm curious what engine that one's built into. We'll do a couple other topics. If anybody's got questions or game dev stuff they want to ask about, just feel free to drop those in the chat while we're live. And welcome, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So quiet, Dave.
What can I say? I'm a man of little words.
Very few words, or are they just very small words? Or which little words are they?
I'm trying to think of a clever answer. Nothing's coming.
If you just said both, it would have worked. It would have worked. Just
Yeah,
to the
I know.
word both.
I know. I did, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Both.
Good stuff. So there hasn't been, well, we haven't had a show in a couple weeks now, so I'm glad to kind of get everybody back in here. And I wanted to do kind of a brief overview of some of the new things that have been coming out and getting announced. There hasn't been, I think, a whole lot of really exciting stuff that's been coming out, but Unity AI beta stuff that we were talking briefly about before. If you go, make sure that you do. I'll put a link in the description. It's their new programs for Centis. The second one, right? Getting my names right?
Yeah.
Oh, we
Yes.
lost.
Yeah.
So if you haven't checked those out, they've got AI for in-game runtime stuff that you can do things like those live chat bots where you're talking to an NPC and it does whatever, I'm sure you've all seen the videos that NVIDIA's put out in World and some of the other places. They've got something similar to that in Centis, and then Muse was the one for generating worlds and environments and assets, from what I understand. It's either yet, but I'm signed up and kind of bugging them and waiting. Oh, my audio is cutting out, someone's saying. I wonder if there's a problem here. So I'm going to refresh real quick and let somebody else take over.
Jason, tell us about the game.
Okay, cool. It's called Dave the Diver, and
Not
I'll be
me.
honest, not you, yeah. Unless you are a diver, you might be.
No, I'm a diver. I'm a qualified diver.
Well, in that case, this game might be for you. I'll be honest, I was quite surprised. It didn't. It looked interesting from the screenshots. It's hard to really tell what kind of game it is because it has lots of fun sort of mini game bits, which are like beats on other kinds of games. But long story short, is it's basically Dead Cells but with a really slower pace. It doesn't look like it, but it's like my number one like point of reference is it's Dead Cells. It's kind of procedural dungeon based, except it's underwater. It's funny. It's basically you kind of level up, you get deeper, you go further into the water, you fight more fish, but the fun part is it took the limiting factors for a game like Dead Cells, which is entirely about getting more efficient and faster and the speed element, and adds an entire other element of you're doing all of this to fund your fish shop, which you're then selling sushi. So now you've got this like multi-layered thing where you're doing the fishing for the sake of the restaurant, which you then have to like get likes on their equivalent of Instagram, and then do a whole bit. And suddenly there's like this multi-layered thing where the long story short is you've got like 10 things to think about at any given time. There's like missions you're doing when you go diving. There's fish you might want to get for your particular restaurant because they have different, some food is liked better, some food sells better or whatever. And then there's other elements I don't want to spoil, which kind of get unlocked in terms of both narrative and other stuff as it goes on. And it's got a lot of content. It's one of those games that you look like it just looks like a simple repeated loop, but it's fantastic because you've got an ongoing narrative story that progresses, and you've also got a tight game loop that is consistent, fun, but enough variability to keep you continually playing and slightly getting better as you go. It's great. Highly recommend it.
It sounds really cool. I'm going to grab it today and try it out this weekend because
Would
I
you
think
say
I
it's
want.
trendy?
No, I that's the weird thing is like my number one problem with that genre, like I love roguelites, but I usually find you suck for a really long time until you get good enough that you're now really good at it. But that usually requires you to put so much effort in that you end up having to really invest in the game. But the thing about this game is the pacing is so gentle that you can literally just float around, catch fish, and work on the fish shop, and not really engage with much deeper content if you don't want to. But then when you're in the mood for it, you can go, you know what? Let's dive a bit deeper this time. Let's take a risk. Let's go to the wreckage or whatever. And as you start to progress that, you on more stuff unlocks. So the game is very accommodating. It has this really interesting pacing where at first I felt like I just wanted to enjoy. Like at first I found the sushi restaurant a bit boring. It was like I want to go back to the water. That's where the fun stuff is. But by later to the game, I was like, no. At the moment, I'm trying to get my rating up. I need to get back to the restaurant. I need to get fish quickly so I can get back to. And so it does a really good job of balancing the different elements. So yeah, I'm very impressed with how it took a very common formula and added just enough new elements for me to go, oh, this really changes how it feels.
And it's only single player, isn't it? It's not co-op or anything like that.
Yeah, it's just a single player experience. But like I said, the most impressive thing for me at the very basic level is the problem with roguelites is they tend to be very noticeably repetitious. There hits a point where you're kind of going, I'm just doing the same thing, collecting the same stuff. Now, I won't deny it is a procedural thing and it has a lot of those elements. But I swear it was about 10 hours in before I started to see the cracks of like, oh, now this is where stuff is starting to... I'm in the core loop and I've now seen roughly everything except for narrative stuff. Because it actually has like beats. It'll have story beats that change up things as you go. And they purposefully drip feed you mechanics so that things unlock as you go and more things become relevant or less relevant. So even older areas that were previously like you understood the concepts now have more things in them. There's one bit I'd love to spoil, but it would ruin it. But they added a couple of things later that are like, oh, that recontextualizes some of the early areas, which makes it extra fun, you know.
This looks awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna play this one this weekend because I think I'm gonna steal some ideas for my RPG I've been working on, and I like the idea of one of the things I'd been considering was putting a shop in there, and I've been back and forth, and I want to see how this plays, and maybe that could then kind of become maybe one of the kind of core mechanics here. I'm still trying to figure out that kind of core loop on top of the narrative part. I've got the narrative stuff kind of figured out on paper and somewhat in game, but the loop, actual game loop is still not there. So this might be perfect inspiration.
Is this the RPG you're working on?
Yes.
Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah.
You look like you got some thoughts, Dave.
No.
Well, you can't look like you've got great thoughts and then not say anything.
I've always got great thoughts. They're just not always on the topic.
Fair enough. Cool. So has he played anything else that's really awesome, or is there anything else we should be checking out? And also, I'm curious, do you guys know what engine this was built in? Is this Unity, Unreal, Godot?
This is
Unity.
Unity.
This is Unity.
Nice.
Although it's been compiled to C++, so it's not as easy to decompile and peek behind the code as the other ones, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
Not that I would try, of course. Not that I'd try.
No, wait for Uri to do that.
Oh, yeah, you are. Definitely do that. Yeah, that is a crazy, overwhelmingly positive number of reviews for not even a month out.
Is it a big team working on it, or is it little?
I think it's a big, like, they've got a lot of games under their belt. This isn't their first game, and like it really shows. Because I have no idea what the story is behind the studio, but like they get a lot of stuff right that a lot of games of this scale get wrong. Like from a game flow and a kind of a pacing perspective. Like the fact that it's got a tutorial at the start, which is like the tutorial lasts like an hour and a half. Like it's a long tutorial, but it's not like it's not one of those tedious, boring. It's just basically drip feeding content in a way that gives you enough time to sort of onboard things. And that's the kind of tutorial that like most games get wrong. It's either too long and boring and whatever, or it's, you know, they don't put one in at all. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I think that this seems to be their first big hit that I can see, but it definitely, they know what they're doing.
The point on tutorials, a lot of people keep doing those panels. If I see another game where it's just panel after panel after panel after panel.
You need a panel with a face and some text and
just
welcome. You need to click and then highlight the button.
Turn it off. And it's when there's so many complicated mechanics that you're just like, well, what was the first panel that I looked at and was supposed to read? I've got a friend who literally will just go skip.
That's
play,
me.
And then just fail abysmally and then go, well, that was a terrible game. Which is what most people do.
You've got two friends that do that.
So I recently completely rewrote the endgame tutorial for my Highland Panic game using that endless book asset from that 30 for 30 bundle. So I'm curious what you think about that, because it's not panels, but you're still flipping through pages. There's an interactable table of contents, so you can skip to a specific section if you're interested in it.
Well, I saw
like
the
a
video.
help
Like,
guide.
I really liked the actual construction of the video, and it was an interesting asset. I'd gotten it as well in one of the bundles, so I haven't had a chance to really play with it. So seeing under the hood of how it worked was pretty cool. But I will admit, I will never in any game go to a tutorial external to the game unless I'm actually stuck. And if I am, I do it already frustrated, and so the act of looking at a tutorial is already starting from a place of anger, and so any more additional interaction or conflict or details beyond just get me the word I want to see is usually in the way. So for me it's a case of the number one way to teach anybody anything is to put them in a scenario where they can only do the thing required to move on. And the classic example of this is games like Metroid, which is just like the whole game is frozen, and the only two things left clickable on the screen are the things you need. And you can keep dragging and keep clicking, but as soon as you figure out you drag this to this thing, then it's like, now you got it. That's what happens. That's usually kind of the best way to go. I understand for card-based games and that kind of stuff, it's it would be a long scripted procedural sequence. It's not the same as putting someone in a room with a box and a button and hoping they figure it out. So it is definitely harder, but I do think very few people are going to really engage with a tutorial that's a written external thing.
It's got a massive drop off. When people start playing the game and there's just so much tutorial, they just leave. And if they haven't paid a lot for it, then they don't care. If it's free to play, if you're doing a free to play game and you have a ton of tutorials in it, guess what? Nobody is going to go past your tutorials. Even for card games, you can teach mechanics as it goes on. I mean, it's nice to have a reference book, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I play a lot of games like Oxygen Not Included, and I am constantly on their reference, but I'm going there because I'm enjoying the game. If Oxygen Not Included literally shut you in and didn't tell you anything about how to play the game and didn't give you any interactive tutorials, it would be a nightmare. But it gives you enough interactive tutorials to get you playing, get you engaged, enjoying the game, and then it goes, want to know more? You can go into our tutorial. We have all these tutorials here. We have a book of instructions. We have things that tell you when a gas turns into a liquid, turns into a solid. When you get deeper into it, but you're still hours into the game by the time you're starting to look up those things. I'm not going to play a game that has
I think if you want the 100% most important thing for tutorials, in my opinion, is I said this before about tutorials, and like, if anything, like in life, if you want to learn a skill, nobody wants to learn a skill. They want to have had learned a skill. That's it. Nobody in the entire world wants to go through the process. The learning is always an intermediary step that gets you to the actual I know the thing.
You think they would all just do a matrix jack
literally.
up if they could?
If there's a way to just click your fingers and have any skill or ability, you would do it. Like, you don't want the process. Now, yes, there's merits philosophically in the journey is the destination and all that, but practically speaking, when it comes to learning things, you just want to know the answer. And so the trick to game tutorials, like, if we forget the method, whether it's a screen or a book or a pen, none of that stuff, the number one thing that matters is people only care about the information you're showing them if it solves something that they're actually asking right now. So the number one biggest mistake of all tutorials is a lack of context. If you give me a whole bunch of information, you're telling me what you want me to know, not what I want to know. The reason why real-time tutorials are so good is not actually because they're real-time, spoiler alert. It's actually because they're just in time. They're exactly at the moment when you're like, oh, this is the bit where I need to know what to do. So the trick isn't so much that you're doing the tutorial in real time. It's that you pose a problem, force them to go, how do I do this? And now they need to know the information. And now when you show it to them, that's exciting. That is you've given them a solution to a problem. So the problem with external tutorials isn't that they're external per se. It's that they are contextless. They are basically information you as a dev want to give somebody, not information you as a player want to receive. So the number one thing you can do in any tutorial is structure a scenario where the person wants the information, give them some time to try to figure it out. And if they can't figure it out, provide them information. That cycle, regardless of how you do it, is the kind of the way to tutorialize anything.
Yeah, I agree. I like tutorials where you're playing through and where it's just like the first version with a little bit of hand holding to make sure that you can understand. And if you get stuck, especially like I think you were kind of alluding to with like the timeout, so you can play through and if you figure it out, it's good. But if you don't do anything for 5-10 seconds or whatever, you start to get the notifications, indicators on what it is you were supposed to do, to kind of guide you along the way. Like Dave said, I hit next on every single tutorial and almost every single dialogue. That's why it's important, because if you don't have it, then people, at least I will skip all of your text and not read it because I read slow as hell. So yeah,
but even with voiceover, I mean, it doesn't fix the problem of me just sitting there listening to a person talk at me. I've bought the game, I want to get into the game, and now I'm just sitting for an hour listening to somebody tell me how to play the game, and I'm like,
I was thinking more just general voiceovers and text, not so much tutorial-y voiceovers, but like, yeah.
There's only one manual There's only one manual I've recently read, and that was when I bought a table saw. Like I was like, yeah, I'm going to read this manual because I like my fingers. But outside of that,
but my one exception is the game Tunic, where it's actually a literal mechanic of the game. That is a very good example of tutorializing because it's a red herring. The tutorials in the book don't really tutorialize the game. They tutorialize the features. They're not tutorializing. So you have to understand the subtext. It's a very clever game for how it does that. But if anyone points that as an example, it's not really an example because it's a very different scenario. It's an actual mechanic disguised as a guide.
Got a question just popped up here. By the way, if anybody has questions in chat, feel free to ask them. And I think Salim and Harrison might show up in a little bit too. So it might be a big group. Take lots of interesting questions. Developers without much design. They're wondering if. So this first question was just about whether or not developers without much design sense can survive in the game industry. I'm going to say yes off the bat because I feel like I have no design sense and I've made it okay. And I know lots of game programmers, at least, that are not good designers and wouldn't even want to like think about game design. They like the code architecture design stuff and nothing with the game design. But I think that if you're good at game design, then you'd be like Dave and get this extra bonus of just being a badass and able to do design and code and art all at once. So what do you guys think though? I mean, I assume you all agree that you don't have to be a good designer, but it helps.
If you're a solo indie, then
then you better be good.
Then you better be good. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, you can produce a game that does really well because it goes viral, but it's rubbish. I mean, Flappy Bird. But no, if you want to produce a good game and you're a solo dev, learn design. Like read books, watch tutorials, learn how to do it, play games, break down games, look at how they do it. Play Portal. Like you want to learn how to do tutorials and make them interactive and really show people how to play. Play Portal. Break it down. How did it do it? What did they do? But yeah, if you're rubbish at design and you're a solo, most people go when they play a video, I could make a video game and I could do this and that and the other. Not if you don't learn how to do it. But yeah, if you don't have much design sense, then either learn if you're a solo or hire a designer.
Along those lines about books, Dave, I'm listening to an audio book right now. It's Sid Meier's memoirs. I got it with a free credit on Audible. It's riveting and a lot of nostalgia too, since, he started like right about the time I got my first computer. In fact, one of the things he said was he had to port some of their games to this new computer that was hitting households across the country, the Commodore 64. That was my first computer.
I had a VIC-20 before that, and then the Commodore 64. Yep.
I had a few before that.
Oh yeah. Before that, I had to use my uncle's computers.
Yeah.
I think they got me that VIC-20, so I would stop using theirs all the time, and I would just use my own to play my little games on my tape deck. Remember that? So I got to grab this book. I'll check out later.
Yeah, my dad couldn't get on his Commodore 64 because I was hogging it all the time.
Yeah, Commodore 64 and then the Amiga.
Oh yeah. The Amiga blew me away with its power. The one thing I really loved about that Commodore 64, though, was just the way that it dropped you into a programming language in a dev environment from start. like you turned it on and you could write code. You didn't have to load up a code editor. You just start writing in the code and it worked. So it kind of like I feel like it got me to write code without even realize, like without having to think like something. It was just there kind of. I don't know. I feel like it was a big inspiration for me.
Yeah, same here. Because when I was learning to use the Commodore 64, I didn't realize it at the time, but the manual was teaching you how to program in BASIC. And when I suddenly realized I had just written a computer program, it was like mind blowing. I just wrote a computer program because I thought that was something, these super smart people you saw on TV did. And never really considered it as something I could do.
Yeah. So what's this book about? Can you talk a little bit more about this book, Greg?
Well, yeah, so a lot of it
memoir
is
one?
just, how he started making computer games. But later on in the book, he does talk about some of the design decisions. And, one of his dreams was to make a real-time strategy game. And so he's going to talk about Civilization. I haven't gotten that far into it.
Yeah, the further away, the book showcases how he was working on the Pirates, later Tycoon, Civilization, Sim Golf, and so on. Yeah, it goes quite nicely how he developed the skills and design skills to approach from simple games up to the games like Civilization and the newest ones. Yeah, but not all. But also he goes into running company, then managing licenses because they had big fights about licenses when everything changed. So it's amazing story about what he created during these years.
Yeah.
It looks really good. Like I said, I'm going to grab the audiobook and listen through. If anybody in chat has other good game design books, please drop them in here, though. I'm curious to get a couple more. I've got a little bit of traveling coming up, so plenty of time to listen through all the audiobooks.
There was a Humble bundle that Pal put up the other day in our little private.
Yeah, we were talking about the book of lenses at one stage, weren't we? I think that came up.
Yeah, but the book bundle is more about board games. Yeah, rather than computer games. Yeah, exactly this one. Yeah, but if you know how to create good board games, it helps a lot with computer games.
Yeah, I feel like the skills translate almost 1-to-1 or pretty close.
Except the tutorial stuff we were just talking about, because you'll get that big pamphlet that tells you how to do it, and you have to sit there and read and read.
All you have to do is just copy that pamphlet over.
Not always. I saw there are several board games that I play, which have several books on tutorials. And first one is just, for example, there was one game that had just one page. You did it in 10 seconds, and you can play basic version. Then when you're accommodated with basic version, you want to add additional stuff to the game, you take another book with additional stuff. And they have 3 or 4 these kind of instructions that go along with your skill. If you're skilled enough to play on higher level, then you take another one. So
I will say, though,
also be done this way.
My personal experience with board games, like I've played a lot. We used to have like an entire shelf full of the whole collection of everything from Catan up to the Ultimate Werewolf and all those kinds of ones as well. But the something that I've noticed is when you get a new board game, you almost always want to get straight into it. So you play some version of the game. You usually get about 20% of the rules right, and you're kind of going, okay, this is kind of fun, but I'm not quite getting what do I do with these things? How does this work? And so it usually takes about 3 or 4 iterations to figure it out, because some of the mechanics are sort of hard to fit in context. Like I remember playing what is the Mansion one, where you've got the Omen cards, and then trying to figure out the narrative structure, because the book has you go back and like load different bosses depending on dice rolls and stuff. It's a whole thing. So yeah, they're really cool, but I do think to your point, Dave, the thing about video games as an interactive medium is like you have control over what the person is doing, seeing, and involved in. And so I think the biggest misstep is to not use that information and go, actually, I can hide all the other pieces, make you just look at this one and go that one. You can't do that in a board game, because everyone's going to dump everything on the table and go try to figure out what's going on, Well,
it's a famous case of Monopoly, isn't it? Where loads of people play Monopoly wrong, because they've never read the rules. They've just learnt off somebody else. And when you start telling them, oh, if you don't buy that property, it goes up for auction to everybody on the board, and suddenly the whole game changes and it plays a lot faster. But loads of people didn't know that you could actually do that.
Jason,
fun.
was that game you were talking about, Betrayal on the House on the Hill?
That's the one, yeah. Great game. Like it's one of the most reusable board games I've ever played, because more than any other board game, it's got scenarios. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure book, where like you play the exact same map, but you build the mansion procedurally out of cards, out of blocks. But the most important part is the story changes every time. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. I have it myself in.
Yeah, I have it back here. But the re-release is even better because it fixes some of the weird, kind of confusing scenarios you can run into.
Yeah, I definitely think it's if you're into board games, that one is one of my 3 favorites. Between that, Resistance, and there's a Sherlock Holmes one, which is just fantastic as well.
We, my friends and I played this once, and I think we've all decided that perhaps we got one of the bad scenarios because we all were very confused and did not like it. But then we hear all these great things about it. We just haven't gotten around to trying it again.
They play phenomenally different. Like we had one of them where it was Death was playing chess, and you had to like race to the room where Death's in it and play a game of chess with him. And if you lost, then one of your team members would die. Then we had a different one where one of our team members turned invisible, and they got a whole different set of rules. And now they have to go around and stealth kill everyone, while the other ones have to try to make you visible to find you. Then you have a third one where one of the characters turns into a demon and a werewolf or something and attacks everybody. And so you were previously working together, gathering all the items, but now suddenly some of the items are needed for a spell to like remove the curse. And so you have some of them because they didn't know that was going to happen. So now they have to try to get objects off of you. Then there's another one where there was like paintings on the wall, and you have to like destroy certain paintings and in the right rooms, and then the other person has to like it's a whole lot of, again, vastly different experience. Like each game, there's like 35 scenarios or something in the original book. So like, yeah, if you play it a second time, it will be a very different game. I can tell you that much.
So, Dave, what's this one here that you just sent over?
This is a LitRPG book called Dungeon Crawler Car, and it's been listed on nearly every review site of LitRPG if you're into LitRPGs. It's been listed as the best LitRPG ever written, and it's amazing. It is absolutely hilarious, and it's just phenomenally written. So
nice. So I just dropped it in chat as well. So Andrew, you just dropped in a link too, and I get the sense that you might have played a board game or two too.
Well, I've played a few board games, but I was going to say I listened to a lit RPG. I never knew what a lit RPG was, and I got one on Audible, and maybe they're not the best for audiobooks because the author has to suddenly read tables of stats, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? I was very confused. Now I won't listen to a lit RPG. Maybe I'll should read that one. This is one though I did listen to, Slaying the Dragon. It's a history of Dungeons and Dragons, which I thought was very interesting. And I was surprised. My first fantasy book was the Dragonlance books. One summer, somebody introduced me, and I read them all. And I didn't realize just one tidbit from this. They were paid very little for the Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman were paid extremely low amounts for those stories. And I'm sure they're fine now in the end, but holy cow, they got screwed.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I always wonder if authors ever make good money without, blowing up and being one of the super huge, 1% of them. Although I did day before yesterday, I got to interview Harrison. I don't know if he's going to hop on today. He did this. I don't know if you guys have seen this book. There's a couple different editions of it. The Learning Unity or Learning C# by Developing Games with Unity. It's like a book primarily about C#, but using Unity, but it kind of minimizes the amount of Unity specific stuff and heavily focused on the C# stuff. I thought it was a pretty good book for beginners. But sorry, it just moved my mind over to book stuff. So it was sitting right in front of me and fresh in my head. And he may end up hopping in here soon. So we get to chat about that too, and about the money making thing. Oh, speaking of hopping in, it looks like Salim's been lurking in the corner right there.
Basically.
Hello. You guys
He's
hear me?
alive.
Yeah, we hear you well.
Yeah, long time no see, Salim. It's been a while.
Yeah. I've been fairly busy.
Lots of stuff going on, I'm sure. Have you gone through any of these lit RPGs before, Salim?
No. I found out about the concepts fairly recently, but haven't had a chance to really dive into it.
Okay, yeah, it's a bit of a new one to me, so I'm gonna check it out. I want to grab some of these books too, though. Also, you got any other design books you would recommend?
Well, I was just going to point out the only thing they do say about Dungeon Crawler Car is once you've read that, every other lit RPG is rubbish.
So you're saying don't do that one first?
Or
maybe just do that one and no others?
Yeah, just do that one and no others.
Oh, now more game devs and Avengers. Yep, just need Uri to hop in.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Did you have any other design books you would recommend, Salim?
Oh man, not off the top of my head. Nothing I've read recently because I don't really get a chance to read much. The only thing I'm reading right now is Starship Troopers, just as a general novel reference. Because a coworker of mine said, if you've seen the movie, read the book because they're not related. They're both good, but the book itself is fantastic. And yeah, the book is fantastic.
That's what I've heard. I've seen a couple documentaries that were basically videos talking about all the differences between the book and the movies and stuff. It was pretty interesting. Yeah, I remember those movies. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Speaking of old shows, Powell, I'm almost caught up on Babylon 5 and ready to watch the new one. I've been binge watching as much as possible so I can watch the new Babylon 5 movie.
Are they relaunching Babylon or continuing?
I haven't actually seen it. Paolo, do you know more about I've been trying to avoid finding out too much about the new thing until I finish rewatching all the old one because I didn't remember any of it.
Nope, I haven't had any information. I'm also trying to be as far away from the spoilers as I can. Yeah, because I watched Babylon 5, the whole series 10, 20 times. So yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so
It wasn't that good.
But in Poland there weren't that many shows.
I'm Deep Space Nine guy.
I already went through that like 2 years ago. Rewatched all that.
Yeah, Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek show there is for me. Sorry, it's so good. Babylon 5 one time. Babylon 5 is pretty good though.
I'm equal opportunist when it comes to space sci-fi. I've seen everything from your Farscapes to your SG-1s. Doesn't matter. I've seen them all.
Farscape's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's all about the Expanse. It's all about the Expanse.
Franchise.
Everything else.
Man. Stargate and Firefly, I think.
Oh man, Stargate. Oh god, so many good ones. Most of these just make me think about working with Jason on Vanguard because we would binge watch these things while we're staying at the office late trying to get something in.
Yeah, I'm binge watching Babylon 5 while I record videos over here. So.
Have y'all ever played the Babylon 5 Tactical Starship Combat tabletop?
No.
Yeah.
It's some of the best mechanics for that type of game I think I've ever played.
No, I didn't know that existed.
Do you know that there is new Stargate film and TV series in development?
Oh, okay.
Amazon is working on them.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Hopefully it's good. The last one I was less excited about. But,
Yeah,
Universe.
yeah.
Universe wasn't that so good.
I did play the Battlestar Galactica board game though. That was a fun one.
Yeah, that one's pretty fun.
It's got elements of Resistance and stuff where there's the classic who's the spies kind of mentality.
Who's a Cylon? Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
but there were some, I think, 3D games also with Babylon 5. Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't know all this existed. I'm gonna have to check this out.
There were some space, but the space combat in Babylon 5 is rather hard for someone that doesn't play a lot.
That is,
space
yeah.
combat.
I will say that game as a board game is very there's so many things. There's so much going on the board with all the different pieces and trying to manage different. Yeah, but it's fun. Like I do think I liked it more than some of the other similar kinds of games, but I definitely lost a few friends who were just kind of going, "This is not for me. This is too much stuff."
You ever played the Firefly board game?
I have not.
No. I've heard of it.
Hot take. I don't really like Firefly that much. I just never really. The thing is, I like all of the actors and I understand why it's good, but it isn't. It's one of those ones where you could argue that just like Expanse, they're not really space shows. One is a noir detective show, and one is actually space cowboys. They're just the space portion is a framing device, and that's fine. But I don't really go for the cowboy stuff, and I don't go for the noir stuff as much. So
I would argue that the Expanse depends on the season.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, let's be real. The last seasons go a bit off the wall.
It's awesome. But there's ones where there's like the noir thing, and then there's ones that are just literally space battles every episode, and it's more intriguing. But the Expanse does change season to season with the type of show you're actually watching.
Yeah, and
which is why it's the best space show ever.
I did watch all of it, but I do think it has pacing problems, especially in the last Well, there's I don't want to spoil much, but once you get to gate-based stuff, it starts to they lose me a bit once it starts becoming, again, space battle-y stuff starts to it takes, because I actually liked it at its peak with the noir detective stuff, because you have a character who acts as an audience surrogate, walking you through a story, unveiling the different factions, their allegiances, what's going on, people who like each other. You learn a lot, but then it just suddenly switches on a dime and goes, right, 4 different sets of whatever people, each in their own ships, each with different names you have to remember, each one's with different allegiances and plans, and you're like, I was following up until just last season. I was following, and now it's like everything is all up in the air, and it gets a bit crazy.
So what would you classify Doctor Who as? Is that not a space show?
No, that's definitely a character show. That's Space's entire. Like, if anything, it's a British show. it's very
it's London based.
Careful.
Like, I'll be honest, the fact that you could like accidentally land in London so many times from space, it's interesting. It's just it's amazing.
Well, the earlier shows, like the beginning shows, black and white era, was definitely more about space, landing in foreign places and stuff like that. Certainly more interesting for the time, more exotic. But yeah, the recent one is just all some version of London, different time period or different dimension or something. Yeah.
I will say, like, that's been my disappointment with Doctor Who as a thing, is that I think the best thing about Doctor Who as a concept is the character. The core character of the Doctor represents a person. Like, philosophically, if somebody who has lived forever, or mostly will, and gets to see everything, and has infinite knowledge of the universe, and still has that childlike joy of wonder of all this new stuff, and wants to share it with people, but in doing so often endangers their lives, and then has the conflict of dealing with whatever. And then on top of that, there's the personal narrative of them running away and their legacy across the galaxy from all this. It's like there's so much going on with like an internal conflict of that character that it's a character-driven show. And the most interesting parts are when the Doctor goes to a location and he doesn't know what's going on, figures it out, and then it figures out that he's involved somehow, either in this timeline or in a different one, and all of a sudden engages with the story. And so unraveling the narrative is what tends to be the most fun. But I find that it loses itself a bit once it starts going into because it should be about the characters, and the best interactions in that entire show are the ones where it's the Doctor with somebody. And I find that my personal preference, it's when it's not one of his companions. I think like the episodes where he like meets somebody on a planet and then becomes like a de facto companion for an episode is the best episodes in universally, because it shows him having to engage in a short time frame, meet a new character, have to explain his eccentricities in one go, and like it so it is a good show.
Generally happen on the specials, like the Christmas special on Titanic was a really good one. And then before Donna became as far as recent stuff, before Donna became a companion, there's just a one-off episode where they meet and stuff like that. It's a good point. Those are when it kind of shines as far as the character building and stuff.
Like my favorite episode of the entire thing, well, 2 is Blink, obviously, and then the other one is the one with the I forget which one it is, but the clockwork guys and the windows into the
what about the one where he's on the train with the creature they never show that took him over? That's like one of the greatest episodes. You want to talk about characters just like playing a role, and oh man, it's fantastic.
David Tennant. That's like, I mean, that's personal preference, but I don't begrudge anybody who's got a different opinion. I do think they all bring something to the role. It's just I think David Tennant matched the one thing that none of the others did, which is it's a multifaceted character, and Eccleston manages to get the emo sadness right. And then, Matt Smith managed to get the goofy whimsy right, but David Tennant managed to get both. He managed to be able to switch.
Only got one season though.
True, he probably would have been. Yeah, he could have done more if that's fair.
Eccleston's probably my second favorite. It's hard. I mean, you can't beat Tennant as far as like recent Doctors. You can't beat Tennant. But yeah, Eccleston, if he had 2 or 3 seasons, I think he would have fairly memorable.
He's a phenomenal actor. Like he's done some. There was a show he did.
Broadchurch.
Yeah, well, yes, but it's like there's a really rare one he's done, which most people haven't seen, where he becomes the embodiment of, at least he thinks he's become the embodiment of a religious figure. And then there's this really interesting old show. But he's got a lot of acting range, I guess is my point. Some of the older stuff he's done is kind of very interesting, where he plays a lot of that, the conflict side of stuff.
So your take on Tennant getting both of those facets of the Doctor. That's the way I feel about Spider-Man. You know, you have Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, and then Tom Holland. I feel like Tobey Maguire was the best Peter Parker, and Andrew Garfield was the best Spider-Man. But Tom Holland, I think, gets both of them the best.
I think I mostly agree, because I do think the main conflict, without getting into a whole rant on Spider-Man now as a concept too. My proper introduction was first the comics, but then into the cartoon. And the thing about the cartoon that, again, people tend to forget is he's meant to be a super genius scientist. That's kind of the number one thing about him, predominantly. In fact, like the whole original webbing stuff, it's like that's a thing he made. That's not like he doesn't have that as a whatever. And so as the story progresses, it's meant to be this conflict of like, what is the character? If you just strip everything back, what is it? It is effectively a nerd power fantasy. It is a character who has constantly feeling like they have things to say but are too afraid to say it. It's the Deadpool kind of mirroring concept. In fact, there's even a parallel with the suits and stuff. It's a character who in real life wouldn't say that, but gets to say that when fighting or whatever, gets to like be gregarious and, you know, have a different personality. And I find that if the character doesn't have a dichotomy, it kind of loses some of that. And every single film version of the character feels like it's the same guy with a suit, right? It's the same personality of a person, which is fine, but it doesn't take too much away. But it means if you try to do something like a Venom arc, which kind of accentuates certain aspects of the character, it doesn't work as well, because there's no internal conflict. If you take somebody who's naturally shy and then they're only gregarious when they have a mask on, and then give them that kind of evil tint of the Venom kind of symbiotic stuff, that really twists the character in ways where it's like, well, what if you had no filter? What if you didn't hold yourself back? And that's sort of, there's an interesting personal narrative arc and leads to a lot of depth. So I guess my point is, I agree with you. He's the best by far so far. But my conflict has been, you end up with goofy nerd, you end up with skater boy who's too cool for the role, and then you end up with this character who manages to nail the like friendly neighborhood aspect of Spider-Man, but he doesn't have that sort of like nerdy scientist aspect that is like you never get a point, because mostly because the actor is too gregarious himself, is you never get a sense that character would have trouble saying what he wants to say in public. And that's the thing. You need to have that element of the character to really like fill in the entire philosophical thing of what makes Spider-Man the character he is actually supposed to represent.
I think my biggest problem with like film Spider-Man is because they constantly reboot, he stays as young Peter Parker. Whereas in the books, he's matured a lot personality-wise, because he's gone through all kinds of crazy stuff related to him being a super genius, dealing with history, Green Goblin, also like many, many years of history. But in the movies, they can't let him grow up. Like he's done a lot of things he's gone through with Mary Jane, his relationship that has matured him so much, that has made the character so much more interesting now. And then him and Miles Morales' relationship, also in the books, is so solid and fun to read. And a part of that, he's become a mentor for this younger Spider-Man. I think, man, what's the last Spider-Man? What is it called? Spider-Geddon.
The Spider-Verse or something?
Yeah, Spider-Verse, sorry. I think that Peter Parker as his mentor is just kind of an example of it. They do treat Miles Morales really good in both those. Those are probably the best Spider-Man on-screen examples, period. And they're focused on Miles Morales, who's not even supposed to exist in the normal Earth.
I do think that the core conflict for me with that is the fact that there's a running joke among Spider-Man fans in the comics is that he never gets any happiness. Like at any moment, as soon as he gets a single ounce of happiness, something horrible happens to him. And the thing is, that's like, it is a joke, but at the same time, it's super character building. Like the entire point is that he's meant to be, in the same way Batman has this constant conflict of like, look, if you just kill the Joker, everything will be easier. We all know this. Just solve the problem. But he won't, because he can't for the moral reasons. The entire Spider-Man thing is meant to be, can he maintain that like faith in humanity despite everything else? And if you don't have that, just like the Flash, if these characters don't have the conflicts, then it defeats the point. And I find that there's always a level of mild whimsy to the events that occur to Spider-Man in film. They're not the like horrible things that happen to him in the comics, which I can understand why, but it doesn't give you that same arc and growth and moral questioning and the depth of the original stuff.
Yeah, just think about Mephisto appearing before you on Maze on her deathbed, and you're happily married to Mary Jane, and Mephisto says you can choose one of these timelines, and you're going to remember I think in that he remembered, I think it's called One Last Day as a series, but I think in that he remembered the split timeline, but he had to choose between Aunt May and Mary Jane. He ends up choosing Aunt May. And then you go down this road where Peter Parker and Mary Jane aren't together anymore, and you get to like see all that mature. That's like a massive maturity point for the character, and that's kept itself throughout the books, even with the little retconning here and there. So it's that type of stuff. They just can't, like, it just doesn't exist on screen. It takes too long for them to establish that. That's why I like Spider-Verse is conceptually, because they don't have to deal with aging actors and stuff like that, so they can maybe keep a story going without having to do a bunch of retcon. Of course, because the nature of Spider-Verse, they can retcon some things and it makes sense. But yeah, the on-screen Spider-Man Tobey Maguire, I was like, yeah, this is cool, this is good. Of course, then you get to the dance scene and you definitely want to dig your eyeballs out, but then they can't keep going, and it really makes you sad. I'm like not excited to see X-Men on screen either, because I'm a big X-Men guy, and I know that's just going to get crushed because it's been crushed on screen. But I'm definitely tangent now.
I know you are excited for the Flash, though, right?
I thought it already came out.
It
The
did.
latest one with what's his name?
You didn't go see it?
I did not go see it. The way they got Michael Keaton in is cool because it fits with the books conceptually, but I'm not overly excited about seeing it. I just like seeing Michael Keaton as Batman because he's the best on-screen Batman to me.
That's right. Yeah, Comic-Con's going on this weekend, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I completely forgot that. I would say for me, the core thread here, by the way, everybody, is actually storytelling. Like, to be brutally honest, it's not about specific thing. It's that I've said before, my number one complaint about the games industry is that games are interactive narratives, and they're often miss the narrative portion. So, to me, this is all relevant. I do think it's genuinely part of the same thing. So.
It's not really Jason just got booted from Comic-Con and he really wants to get it all out. They won't let him in after last year's incident.
Well, they won't recognize him now. You can just say that was his dad.
This is true. This is true.
Different timeline. That wasn't me. That was you.
Look like younger than me now.
Oh, I wonder how many people trying to get into Comic-Con have used that excuse. Oh, it was a different timeline.
Hey, it's worth a try. You never know; it might work on somebody.
The security guards are there going, "Do you really think I actually read this stuff?" Just jog along, boy.
Oh man, it's good stuff. So, any other game dev topics you guys wanted to dive into today?
What do you get to start? I have a backlog. So, okay. Recent things. Yesterday, I think it was the multiplayer dev blitz by Unity, and they actually responded to quite a few interesting things. Before that, I also messed with both of the networking packages by Unity now. Now that DOTS networking reached 1.0, I wanted to see how it is. And I am happy to report that it looks really good. But it's still DOTS, so, brain adjustments to try and work with it. The dev blitz itself was kind of really nice. There were a lot of questions about advanced things. They actually responded with quite a lot of useful information. Apparently, they're also really active on the forums lately, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I was planning on doing something around this Blitz day yesterday, but I got distracted in calls and completely forgot about it. So I'm glad you reminded me it happened, so I can at least go through the list and drop the link in chat so everybody can check it out.
Yeah.
Did anybody else get a chance to actually put anything on the forum URI, or were you just
What do you mean?
Was it just your eye?
No. There were a lot of people outside.
Every time they get an opportunity to do that, and Euro's just there going, "Yeah, I'm just going to go back through my notes."
All the good
I think we should just nominate you as a representative. Everyone should send you their questions. You can format them and then send the good ones in.
He has a way of getting answers out of Unity, though, which is pretty special.
I mean, so when I present my question, I'm trying to make it look like I did my work. I'm not just somebody lazy trying to like, hey, I don't know how to do this, I never looked into it, show me the way. I'm saying I specifically trying to find my way. I looked for everything you put out. I cannot find a way with what you have presented. This is the closest thing I've managed to achieve. This is the reason why I can't according to what you have put out. What do I do? And then it comes into a more interesting engagement for the reader, because they are neck deep in these packages. They know what's up, and they know that if I bring up the interesting elements, they can correspond with the advanced knowledge required regarding those interesting elements.
Yeah, for everybody out there who's been wanting a URI YouTube channel, this is the closest thing you're going to get. Go on the DevBlitz thing and then just search him, because I've read all the stuff well, not all the stuff, obviously, I have other things to do, but I've read a lot of the stuff URI puts up, and it's very, very informative because, yeah, he does the work.
Yeah. So in regards to the networking packages on Dots specifically, the networking for entities is actually really, really nice. They have a whole like prediction, back simulation system, automated inputs. Like you barely have to write any networking code at all. They put out the networking megacity sample. It's actually fantastic. Like it's legitimately good. There were samples by Unity that I was not a fan of. This is one that I'm ranking really highly as far as code goes.
Okay, because yeah, I admit I have never been particularly impressed by any of the demo examples that have been released so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think I showed it on your Discord server. I tried to use the networking racing sample with entities. That was a mess. But the megacity one is way better. So I want to get through it because there was a few things that I found really interesting, and one thing that is really actually actionable. Unity play mode, multiplayer play mode is out now as an experimental package in 2023.1. This is a game changer if you're making a multiplayer game. This is legitimately one of the best extensions to Unity that they've ever put out. Like, I'm not hyperbolic here. It is that good. So caveat here, if you're going to try and install it just by the package name, it's going to install version 0.1.1. 0.2.0 is what you want, because this one is like night and day difference. And what multiplayer play mode is, for those that don't know what it is, Unity has a traditional problem that when you try to make a multiplayer game, you only have one player in the editor. When you press play, you only have one game session, one instance of the application, and that can either be a server or a client or a host, which is a client and server, but you don't have separated simulations, so it runs entirely differently from how a traditional server and client connecting to it would be, which is not great, because now you have 3 special cases of like code where you really just want one, like client connecting to the server responding with whatever you need. And Unreal Engine, as opposed to it, for years had a solution where you just have a drop down and you choose how many clients you want, and when you press play, it automatically boots up a viewport for every single client, connects them to the server automatically, spawns the player, and you're off to the races. And you can literally just switch between the viewports to immediately control all the players involved. And that is like a dramatic game changer when you're working on multiplayer. Now, yeah.
As it's very useful. The Unreal side of it,
Yeah, okay. So it is a necessity as far as I'm concerned, because when you're working on a multiplayer game, iteration time is like immensely important in every application, but in multiplayer it's even more so, because every single thing you do has to be tested for experience. You can't just write the correct code and expect it to feel good, because lag exists, the desyncs exist, and all of that is going to be like a dramatic shift in how you have to actually program your thing, because the most correct way to do it isn't necessarily the best feeling way, and you have to test for that repeatedly. Now, with multiplayer play mode, what they do is when you press play, they will boot up a new editor play mode view, and that one runs an entire copy of the application, and it works just like Unreal does, kind of. So,
and it has its own console. I was trying to show it here, but it won't. Restream doesn't want to pop up the other window, but there's a second game view window showing right now.
Yeah. And on top of that, when you do that, it also lets you tag every player with a unique tag that you can then pull for in runtime code. So you can say, if this is the first player, make this the server. If this is the second player, make it a client. And every single one of them has a console viewport. And if you have bugs, logs, etc., it all goes there, and it has its own separate files. And you can configure them however you want. You can say, like, actually, this client has a super player, and this one is a level 1 player. And you can see how they see each other. Or this is blue team, this is red team. Now you can fight different client, like have different client fight each other. And because it's just a tag, you can do literally whatever you want with it. So you can say, this player runs a bot, so I don't actually have to control it. It does everything for me. You can like program as if you program anything else. Just works. And it's a true application separation. So you actually are running a different game instance, which is insanely good. Now, I mentioned the versions at the start, and I want to bring this up because when you use the 0.1.1 version, they actually reload the domain, enter play mode for the main player, and then they boot up the next editor and they reload domain for that. So like you wait double the time to enter play mode, which is bad. And it also has a problem with disabling domain reload entirely, which is something everybody should do in Unity. This cuts down 90% of the time that it takes to enter play mode. We're talking literally saving 3 to 10 seconds every time you press play. That didn't work well on 0.1.1. It works perfectly on 0.2.0. So you press play in 0.2.0, it immediately enters all the players' instances. It's so good, you have no idea. I'm genuinely excited to work on multiplayer with this in place. So that was that. And separately from all of this, which, super happy for multiplayer play mode to be a thing now, there is also the networking for game objects. Actually not bad now. I used to have a very low appreciation for the way they do things. I rated it lowly compared to the other available packages. Not anymore. They actually got good. The boss room sample, actually okay. They do have a lot of feature envy, but it's good, like overall, code-wise. Yeah.
Nice. I'm installing 0.2 right now. I had the version that I have on here is 0.1 from my last little experiment. I don't have a multiplayer game going, so I didn't dive too much into it. But I want to see this new update. So there it is, 0.2. If you don't know how to do that, by the way, you go in and hit plus and do the name, and then once you do that, there's a pop-up somewhere that you guys can't see anymore. But you just put in the version number right there. Oh, there it is. I see it. It's just got tiny S. You put in the name, which matches that, and then put in the version, and you can download the specific version.
It's also amazingly intuitive. There's basically nothing you have to do. There's just one window. You open it up and you press give me another editor. It takes a few seconds. Done.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try that.
Yeah, I think the only thing you think about is that tag. You have to write a tiny bit or copy a little bit of the base code for starting up as a host client or server or something. And outside of that.
Yeah, but this is an add-on editor tooling kind of thing. You don't really need it. If you have a game that has a quick panel, how those easy netcode samples just have a button to host client server, you can just have those and click them manually. Yeah,
that would work too. Yeah, it is more just for speeding it up.
Yeah. The one thing that right now is not the best about it, and it's just minor gripes, you can't actually access the editor context of everything unless you use reflection. So you can't say, I want to move all the editors into a specific layout or etc. etc. You don't have access to the process. So you have to write your own process finding and then adjusting the windows using Windows calls. They also have some small highlight issues, but I responded with feedback about this on the forums. They responded saying that they are addressing everything.
Nice.
Yeah. And it was actually a pretty fast comment too. They're active on the forums is what I'm saying. Yeah. Also, hello.
Cool. Welcome, Harrison. And by the way, anybody in chat, if you guys have played with the multiplayer play mode, drop a comment or just let us know. I'm kind of curious if anybody else is using it. I think it's pretty awesome.
There is a comment by Jeff Lynch saying that he thinks you need 2023.2. You don't. I'm on 2023.1 and I installed it just fine. It says that the version for this is 2023.2, I think, in the changelog, but you don't need it. It installs fine. And it works.
Nice. This thing does seem a little bit snappier too. All right. So, before we go any further, I just wanted to say welcome to Harrison. A couple of days ago, I think I'd mentioned earlier, I did an interview where we talked a lot about his book in depth, and still editing that. It'll probably go up this weekend. But yeah, I was really excited to have you on here too, to just join the conversation and get some more perspectives on stuff. I think it'd be a lot of fun. So welcome. Can you tell everybody just like 30 seconds about yourself real quick?
Oh, sure. I'm a instructional content creator. I do mostly Unity and iOS stuff. I write books. I do video courses. Mostly just teach now, quite honestly. I haven't been professionally developing in a long time. But yeah, got to be interviewed by Jason. And he told me you guys do this kind of regularly. So what are you talking about? What are we talking about?
Well, I admit I'd be interested in, because to me, I think that topic that you just described there, the idea of teaching programming in Unity in general, is a really fascinating topic, because something that I'm sure you come across a lot, because I certainly hit it myself, is trying to figure out the line to walk between teaching game dev stuff versus teaching C# stuff versus principles and best practices. So I just think there's it's a stressful line to walk. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Oh man, I mean, I'm a big fan of managing expectations, like on the first page, first minute. Like it's usually laying out what something isn't, before we do what it is. That's always what I go to. So, I've usually got a pretty good line on where I'm going to go. So like my book is all about C#. So if there's ever a question in my mind, I kind of have to put my personal feelings away and be like, okay, I already committed to having C# be first. So it's C#. And vice versa. If it's all about game dev, I'm going to pick game dev as the primary actor in whatever curriculum I'm making. But that's just me, because it takes too much like thought and energy to like argue with yourself. There just needs to be something at the beginning, be like, well, whatever it is, that's the decision. That's the default.
So yeah, I wish I could do that. The only thing that I can do for certain, no matter what happens, I have infinite energy to argue with myself. That's one thing that I'm particularly good at.
I feel like it's like creep. Like it just kind of gets in there and you're like, oh, I'm slipping away from what I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, the funny thing is, whenever I'm interviewing people, you can oftentimes tell if they've learnt C# with Unity, or they learnt C# and then learnt Unity.
Oh, definitely.
It's like so easy to find that out from people that are coming to interview for you.
Yeah. You can even do it with one or two like in Discords. I can like sniff a question and go, "You've worked in web dev for about 2.5 years." I can tell just from the way you phrase that question. I know enough about your background.
All right, Salim's in a head out, I think. So we'll say bye and hopefully get to steal him again next week or sometime soon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry
Have
about
fantastic weeks,
being
man.
super busy. I miss coming on here and talking to you guys, but I don't know. Maybe I'll become less busy here soon.
We'll get the Avengers back together for the next one.
It looks like Greg's heading out too.
Harrison,
Yeah.
Greg.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Good to see
All
you.
right,
Yeah, I'm
guys.
dropping too. Got to go back to work.
See you later, Sam.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right, Greg. Well, yeah, if you guys haven't checked out Greg's game, Highland Panic, make sure to check that out too. I'll make if the link's not in the description, I'll go add it and go grab that on Steam right now. All right, see you guys both, I guess, soon.
All right. Thanks.
Fantastic week.
Luckily, there's a lot of us, still plenty to talk about. Yeah, on that topic, I'm really curious. Did anybody here learn C# in Unity, or had everybody learned it before? I can't imagine that. I think we all knew it before Unity existed, right?
I learned it at the same time, which was really weird.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
I learned C++ before, straight up, and then I went into an engine scripting class in college, and I learned C#. Back when you could choose between Boo and C#, and I was like,
Chose wrong.
I know. No, my teacher kind of pulled us aside, and after class, he's like, I know I said you could choose, but really we're gonna do C#. So we're just gonna go with it. All right. It's like, okay, sure. I didn't know I don't care. Like
The only game I know of, the only one that I actually know was made mostly with Boo, was Thomas Was Alone. That's the only game I know of which I think is like predominantly programmed in Boo. Every other one I've seen is the right way.
Right? I've never seen. I don't think I've ever seen Boo code. I don't know what it looks like. I just know that I didn't go that way.
Wasn't there some games done in the Unity script, the JavaScript option?
Yeah, JavaScript, but not JavaScript. Yeah, there was a few.
There were a few
Marshalling
games
back and
in
forth
that
between
one.
that was such a nightmare. The dumbest thing about that is you get assets, and hey, people complain about the render pipelines now. Imagine if every asset had a coin flip about whether or not it was programmed in one language or another, and you had to marshal information back and forth between it. Those were the days. That was just
one of the first.
You go on a
Yeah,
Unity tutorial on their API page, and it's in JavaScript, and you're like, and you used to have to flip between JavaScript or C# to say which one you were actually using at the time.
We still have this problem, to be fair. Every single tutorial you go now has like 1 by 10 chance of being with the right set of packages that you're using, and God help you if it's using jobs, dots, etc. And the different version from what you're using, because they actually remove some features in some of the versions. Like addressables literally lost some methods from the 1.5 version.
They almost
C#
got the
C# didn't exist when I started game development, so.
Yeah, but neither did computers. So it's...
The computers didn't exist before.
First, they made electricity.
You were ahead of the curve. You're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, jumping way ahead. We were started with the wheel.
You have a mechanical computer. Dave made his first game on cards,
You laugh.
index cards.
I remember going in with my old man to his job and him getting out the punch cards.
Yeah. My uncle had a punch card system in his room, one of the old ones from his work.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of neat. It'd be like to see how the instructions would work to do that.
Like, look, now I can read the button to start the game, and that's my stack of cards.
Oh, look, I've dropped all the punch cards on the floor.
It's going to be the next like meta project on Kickstarter. It's like, we're going to make Oregon Trail with punch cards on a really old vacuum.
It's going to be a Terraria thing. They're going to start doing like they just done a computer, didn't they, in Terraria or something?
Yeah, and then you could have done that years ago. That's
now
nothing.
do it
It's
with punch
amazing,
cards.
but like it takes a lot of effort. But the system for doing that has been around for quite a few updates, at least the core of it. And while we do give upgrades to like the wiring system in Terraria, it's incremental. Like I think the one last major update it actually introduced everything that you need was in 2016. Do bear in mind I've been working on this for like 10 years now, so I don't remember the exact date of every update. But yeah,
you just remember it was the last one. That's what it was. Literally the last update.
Yeah, it was the final update. Of course, yes. How could I forget? It was the final update.
Is this what you guys are talking about here? This video? Some guys that made a 32-bit computer inside Terraria?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
But they're too advanced. They should have done it in punch cards. That's what I'm saying.
And then the punch cards get moved over physically and loaded in each one?
They just literally carry the punch card over, put it in.
So
put it in. Well, okay. Yeah.
There's something I should actually mention, just as a praiseworthy thing. This video was actually optimized via a mod because the wiring system in Terraria is immediate. So when you trip any of these wires, like using a switch, etc., the system actually crawls through the wire and tries to resolve everything at runtime. We don't actually build any structures in the back end to, like, say, optimize this. And to run this at any reasonable speed, the guy literally ripped out the original system and put in a new, better optimized system that actually tracks like the groups of what the wire actually connects to, because the transmission is instant, but resolving everything like by crawling is way too slow. So praiseworthy there. They have proper criticisms. They address everything that is like improvable, how they actually approached it. It's basic computer science, according to them, which I mean, I agree with, but it is nice that they are being very reasonable about it. I just wanted to say, like, it's an open package too, so you can just literally read through it. Very nice from the thing. I love the modding community for doing all that stuff. Yeah, so
that looks freaking amazing to me.
Yeah, it is. There is something that I wanted to bring up earlier. You said you were working on instructional content and that you love like putting the premise of what there will be taught at the beginning. And I think that like is dramatically important, especially when you talked about the tutorials in games. It's so important that the tutorial is saying, I am going to resolve your problem by the end of me speaking. Or like presenting
but
you with
this and
information.
only like this problem area, not all problems. This problem.
Yeah, and like even if there is a small tease at the end, or like you can actually interact with another mechanic doing whatever I just taught you.
Oh yeah, signposting is like that's the best part of like having control over your curriculum. You can put those little like signposts anywhere you want to send people off. I mean, I've got a huge sticker where I write that says no assumptions, and like I have to keep looking at that every time I'm writing or making stuff, because like that's the hardest part, is like remembering how you thought about this stuff when you didn't know it.
That to me is the number one goalpost too. I personally go with the phrase curse of knowledge, right? Because I remember that specifically that phrase of like, it's so hard to remember what it was like to not know a thing. So it's like, it's nothing to do with intelligence. It's simply a matter of once you do something automatically, it's like the classic ride a bike example. It's very hard to go, I did find this hard. I remember finding this hard. I just don't remember exactly what aspect of this I found hard. And so you have to put yourself back in that mindset and go, there was a time where this made zero sense to me, and can I can I embody that again and give myself the same hurdles so that I can find a way to describe ways over them?
Yeah, it's called shots.
Shots.
Drinking shots. Once you've drunk enough shots, you go back to exactly knowing.
No, see, I go straight bomb or peak. That's the problem with being Irish. My standards are, it takes.
Okay, drugs.
It's the secret debuffs.
So do you guys have any tips for doing that? For like tricks that you use to kind of make it outside of drinking? That one won't work for me because I'm a super lightweight, and like one drink and I'll forget what I'm doing for the rest of the day.
So usually when I have to work on like instructional stuff, and I don't do that a lot, but I observe and break down like a lot of the stuff that I'm presented because I read all the documentations and stuff. But the thing that I see repeated is that it's good to either link to something to get more information immediately, or cut down as much words as you can and then include everything that's required with the terms that you're saying. Like I played a game for years, and that game has tutorials for every new character it releases. And every time that a character is released and I play the tutorial, it's going to tell me this character can do 5 attacks and then a freezing attack. Freezing makes the enemy stay in place and take more damage from physical attacks. Like they try to include what the effect of freezing is, even though I've been playing it for 6 years now. Because it's important to know what freezing is if you're a first-time player and this is your first character that you're going to try to play. So either they do that and highlight the important words. So when you actually have to make this kind of thing, I would start by writing everything that I want to present, cut down as much words as I can, highlight the words that I'm not sure that somebody understands. And like this is very easy. Like if you're mentioning a mechanic or anything that's like off note, you're going to have to explain what that note means because it's off note. Like by definition, you be able to witness that. And then after you have that version, you cut down even more words because there's no way. Like if you are reaching a point where somebody can lose track by a phone call, etc., and they can't return to where they were and continue listening to you, you lost. Like this is like my benchmark. It has to be so quick that you have to be able to retain the thought from having a random call out to action from the side.
That info density is that's super important.
Yeah, I've got a new rule on my stuff where I try to keep everything at 10 minutes or less, at least unless it's a very deep topic. And then not that, and the way I'm saying is I do that in, so I'll do like a lesson and each section of it will be 10 minutes or less. And it may be like the whole section is, an hour or 2 hours of stuff, but I break it into these parts where you can do kind of that logical piece, get that all through, and then continue on to the next piece and be able to continue. Because I found when you do something big and long and going, it's very easy to, it's very difficult to let people kind of continue along and follow along the second they get distracted. So cutting that into like small, like bite-sized chunks that you can do it kind of like in I got my little Pomodoro timer and do it like in a 15-minute timer and go through that section and then do the next section. try to break it up like that, because I found that it helped minimize people getting lost, stuck, and very confused. Sorry to interrupt with that, but staring at my timer here thinking.
Oh, there was a thing I read. I can't remember where I read it, but like someone did a study, and it was like 4 to 6 minutes is prime retention for working knowledge that they don't know and they have to integrate, and like 6 to 8 minutes is iffy, and then anything past that from like 8 to 12 is a sharp downward curve of retention, and then after that you might as well give up and cut, because no one's going to remember anything at all. So like there's that sweet spot, like where our brains can still focus and retain, well, that focused work that we were doing. And after that, I mean, you have to like plan around this. Like you have to plan for our brains.
Yeah, I would say I'm boringly clinical with my approach to this stuff. Is that I go straight to the psychology of how people will approach information, and the first thing I go for is that people don't care if they don't know why they should care. And the very first mistake I see in almost every single tutorial is someone saying, "I want to teach you this," and they're like, "Cool. Why do I want to listen?" Like that's the first question everyone's own head has, whether they realize it or not. And I find a lot of people don't upfront load with, "This is cool because," and so you need to first sell why they should care. And so my structure is always the same. It is, hey, is this a problem you have? Let's talk about how to solve it. Or, hey, here's a cool thing. Would you like to know how this cool thing works / how to do it? Then move on to the next phase. And the next phase is me saying, now that I've established that you want to learn this, we go through the process of saying, you probably think from here. So you basically meet them where they're at and go, you probably think this, or you're probably at this point, and you try to match their energy, because a lot of people will look at something and go, oh, you're telling me I'm doing it wrong. I'm like, no, I'm telling you, you're doing it this way, which is logical assumptions based on what you have. But here's something you might not have thought of, which gives you this new piece of context, which gives you new information, and I walk them in the direction you want them to go. So I think that for me, the two core steps is, one, make them interested in why you're even teaching them, and the second one is to meet them where they are and then move slowly the needle where you're going, did you consider this? If we consider that, now this. But if you consider this, now this. And so you're trying to, as you were saying before, it's about that, keeping a solid context of what you're trying to teach. It's sort of moving through the sea of information.
See, I don't do any of that. I just put random thoughts into a video and put publish.
Right, because your videos are not the most pointed, fastest tutorials with the best audio coverage that I ever heard. That was sarcasm. I'm bad at sarcasm, yes.
I was just about to say, that's really harsh.
Hey, you're ugly and I hate you.
Whoa, I'm going to go close the channel right now. Deleting every video I ever put up. What? I thought we were friends.
Yeah, so in regards to tutorials and premises, I just wanted to say that one thing that I found really good is that tutorials include the least, like a title that says what they do with the least words possible, but include an image of what you'll get to have by the end of it. Like, if I am playing a game, I want to see you get the cool stuff, like the most amazing attack with like a huge explosion, etc., etc. It is the underlay for the text that says the tutorial. And if you click that and you want to do that attack, it actually links back to the tutorials that you need to get to that point. And then it's like, oh, so I have to go through this to get to there. And it's like, it's actually going to warn me, hey, you didn't try those tutorials, you won't know how to do this perfectly. But like the tutorial is the premise. I'm going to get this explosion by the end of like what I am doing. Also, my source of reference is action games. I just want to be very clear here. I play a lot of those, less of other things. I find that like tutorials are, they are less information dense games when they're not action games, because you have less to keep track of like in real time. So yeah.
So going back to, I want to ask Harrison a question. So where do you think people that are learning Unity fall down as far as C# is concerned?
All right, this is going to be an unpopular opinion, and it's not meant to be mean. I think the component, like Unity's component system, or the like using so much of the component design pattern for the underlying engine is like a really big divide for how you learn how to program in C# versus how you program in Unity. And so you have to like I love how it works in Unity, but when you go into a bigger project and you go into like design patterns and architecture and trying to make systems work together, the component part of it, you have to kind of relearn how that fits in, because I mean, for me, when you open Visual Studio and it's just .NET, you're in charge of, the structure. And when Unity hands you Unity, it doesn't really tell you that it's really handing you a component architecture.
Yeah, 100%. You've said exactly what I say. So it drives me insane. I was actually going to bring this up earlier when I specifically asked the question at the very start, where I said that conflict between the two. What I was specifically describing is when you teach C#, you traditionally teach through construction, through object instantiation, and go through the steps. When you teach in Unity, this magical fairy dust in the background instantiates a whole lot of objects, doesn't let you use constructors, creates lifecycle systems, and uses an inherent component model, which is all really powerful from a modular game perspective, but it's a design pattern based on design decisions which serve a purpose, which is like, until you understand why that's there. And every time I sat down to try to describe it, I even actually have some on my GitHub, I think I still have it, I rewrote a component model that just did like a lifecycle update, start, and all that stuff, just to try to explain that process outside of Unity, and it's frustrating.
And you have like a 30-minute video about that too.
I mean, it is a thing where it gets you, it kind of, someone has to pull away the curtain for you, or you go down a rabbit hole on Stack Overflow like a year and a half after you start Unity. Some way you figure out that, oh, this is not like how everything is. And like you said, Jason, I love how the component system works in Unity. It's fantastic. But you're right, it is a decision that, is not like in big bold letters out front, because it would scare people. Like, I see why they don't. But like, you got to adapt.
The one thing that I would say about this is Unity tries to get you to do the thing you want, not to understand what you're doing, which is the big divide here.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, no, remember back in the days of dot audio, just do dot audio, whatever that means. It'll work. Yeah.
Yes, you can use interfaces. You should use interfaces.
Unless you want to serialize things, in which case it's a whole different conversation.
Well, yeah, all right. Then we have to talk about other things. But in general, interfaces are wonderful.
They're getting better about it.
Learn them.
Slowly but surely, serialized references becoming usable. Yeah, so
I will say though, that's one. I'd say, just as another side note, the other one is simply the difference between event-driven and loop-driven applications, and that kind of goes back to what Dave said. I can tell immediately when someone comes from a web or enterprise-based background, because their entire approach to software will be layer-based applications, and they're like, oh, well, it's layering is obviously makes sense because you got multi-tiered applications, all this kind of stuff, and you have to stop them and go, yeah, but in that environment, it's event-driven. Like the actual time between events doesn't matter. There's not as many layers of abstraction. But update loop-driven applications is a completely different conceptual architecture because the requirements are different. The speed requirements are different. The memory performance requirements are different. And so I'd say those two are the big ones. So one is the architecture thing, and the other is just understanding that you actually think differently in loops versus in events.
Yeah, I mean, when you start thinking about that, it almost seems like people choose, even in Unity, like you'll see people who just have event-driven games and they use it for everything. They'll build a really powerful, like generic underlying observer pattern kind of distribution. And then that's how their entire game runs, other than like fixed update with physics stuff. It's like, oh, okay, so we're going to like switch and make it like totally custom how you think. And that works. That works great. But you can totally tell you're right.
Yeah. There was something I wanted to say here regarding the magic that Unity tries to like keep away from you, because the thing that frustrated me the most, knowing C# first and then coming to Unity, is that I had methods that were not public and yet they were called. This is like the most
magic methods.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Unity lifecycle, the understanding that my class will be found without having been registered anywhere, and then its own private methods are going to be called without me having like invoked them in an order that I don't control and I don't see, and I need to try and make everything not be reliant on proper order of things, was like maddening. Like I legitimately, the first year I was using Unity, and I was a proper programmer by then, I was already working on Terraria, I could not fathom how anyone works with this system where you don't control the order of things. Like these days it's easier, but controlling order is like super important if you want an application to run well. I don't want things to be 1 frame late. I don't want things to be running out of order, and then I have like the 1 frame lag where the camera is behind the character like by 1 frame off, and then my character disappears for a single frame, or there's jitters because the calculation ends up being not correct because the camera is pointing to where the character was versus where the character is actually. Like those stuff. It's like it's so far removed from traditional programming. Because they're trying to make magic. You don't need to care about it. We'll worry about it to figure something out. Until you do.
Until it becomes a problem, and then you really have to figure it out. Hey, are we allowed to post stuff in the chat? Someone asked about Unity events, and it's a really good question because there are serious issues with Unity events versus C# events, at least if you benchmark stuff.
This one right here?
Yeah.
Falling in love with the observer pattern in Unity development using Unity events, and they want to know if there are any issues or pitfalls.
Yeah, I got like I got a link for them.
Yeah, if it won't go in the regular chat, just drop it in the private one, and it'll let me drop it into there.
There you go.
We'll pull that right up. What's this link?
Oh, it's this guy writes really nice testing and like benchmarking articles. And this one is about C# versus Unity events with garbage collection. Oh. And I mean, I didn't know this really helped me honestly when I was trying to figure out the best way to do an observer, like kind of base to a game, and like how to do it. If it's worth doing it in the editor, basically, like what's worth the extra pain and memory cost of having events be drag and droppable versus having to do it all in code. But it's really nice. It's got benchmarks and lots of nice diagrams, but it makes it pretty easy to figure things out, or at least to come to your own conclusions.
Yeah, but it does kind of highlight though that the problem, in my opinion, with this kind of conversation or the concept is that a lot of people, like I actually remember one of the, looking back, is a silly conversation I had with one of my professors back in college. Was I remember reading the design pattern book and talking about the observer pattern and how much, I like the observer pattern so much more than events for this reason or that. And I'm like, I didn't know or didn't realize they're literally one is the implication of the other. Like it's a stupid sentence. But again, as you're learning this stuff, you're kind of, you look at the elegance of the interface interconnection and you're like, oh, that looks nicer as opposed to Z. But now understanding that and kind of realizing that actually the real problem, what I find with a lot of these conversations, is people don't understand the relationship between classes, indirection, and referencing each other. And all of these things are just different tools that get you the same thing. And it's like saying, I'm trying to get from location A to location B. I can use any vehicle I like to do that. But a lot of people get stuck in the weeds about debating which is better for like a car or a bike or something. It's like, well, no, they're like, that's not how this works. They're different things that do different things that have different use cases for requirements for space or memory or performance or for whatever. And you pick the right thing for the task you're trying to perform. And it gets into a lot of this really weird debates where I think if people understood the underlying concept of, we are trying to have this thing reference this thing without too much dependencies, let's look at the cost benefits and why that's good or why that's bad, and then you pick the right one. There isn't like it's not like give you the right answer, because a lot of people will ask me, should I use events? Should I use Unity events? Should I use C# events? Should I use this? And they want the answer, and I'm like, there isn't an answer.
There is no answer.
if I'm working with designers in the editor and it's not hypercritical in a performance update loop, a Unity event is great because I can have a decoupled event in the thing. But if it's core game logic, I don't want my business rules defined in the logic of events that'll get destroyed or missing if someone doesn't see them. But at the same time, if I want more performance, I'll use Unity event. And so there's an answer dependent on use cases, and it all boils down to, do you understand what it's doing? And I think that tends to get lost in the weeds of like, just tell me the architecture to use and I'll use it. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, the whole over optimizing and looking for an answer without having a context gets me every time. Like there's going to be, even with teaching, like you can't offer them the right answer because we're only teaching how about this problem that we're looking at right now, which may or may not apply to you at some branching of the context. Like, it could be 10 minutes into a video and you're like, you're watching, you're going, oh, this is where our similarities end. I have a totally different, feature spec and requirement than this tutorial is going ahead with. So, you finish and you're like, okay, now I have to go find another solution.
There is a saying that I don't remember the exact words of, but the premise is there is nothing worse than the wrong action executed perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, when you are trying to implement something, most of the time, the way doesn't matter unless you have a very specific case where it absolutely matters that it has to be the best, because if it's not the best, it's a direct failure. Like, this is your baseline win condition for whatever you're trying to do. If it's not that, it doesn't matter what the small details are. Use whatever gets you to the finish point faster. Which is why we have so many programming languages that are focused on convenience, by the way, and not just the most performant one. Because we're trying to get things done, we're not trying to get things that run well. Things running well are for the computer's sake. Do you care about the computer? Is it your overlord being? No, what you're trying to do is an action. The computer serves you to do that action, and you're trying to get things done. So in human words, describe what you need in a way that a computer can understand and do it as quick as you can. This is the whole premise of Python being so convenient. Register anything, do whatever, as long as it can run the actual code and get things done. That's it.
Which is why we ignore actions, we ignore Unity events, and we go to the monobehavior broadcast message. And we just use broadcast message for sending all of our actions everywhere.
That's the way you do it, right?
If at first you
Oh,
don't
so
succeed,
about that.
find object
Send
of
a
type.
message.
That's what you do. Just find it. It's fine. It's fine. Magic will happen. It'll just work.
You know that I've done the Unity certification a few weeks ago. 2 weeks ago? Week ago? Yeah, you know that I think there were 5 or 6 questions about sending messages and broadcasting message that you have to know
Oh,
to
really?
pass the certification. Yeah.
They're probably very old, is my guess. I think that's a test that was 4 years old or something.
When was the last time I used that feature? I honestly don't remember.
I
genuinely
can't remember
don't.
ever using it in my life.
I told someone specifically to use this when he was a beginner and he was working in a team of 4 on a game jam. And I just said, look, just use broadcast message. It will work. Everyone can write our code. You just need to know the name. Decide on the name as a team. Use that. You don't have to scan. You don't have to just use broadcast message. It worked well because it wasn't something they're calling every frame. And honestly, even if they called it every frame, they had so few game objects in their scene. It didn't matter. You don't need the game to run at 600 FPS. Nobody's going to play your game at 600 FPS. It's on a web browser.
Honestly, the bigger one that frustrates me is the thing that Dave specifically called out in his last video, which again drives me insane that people do this, is the amount of code where someone has 500 scripts and they all have the first line in a wake, go find object of type, and it's the whole game starts and goes, right, we're about to do 5,000 crawls through the entire hierarchy of the application before we show anything. It's please.
Yeah,
do that.
I was very surprised how much people didn't know that. That video blew up a little bit where people were like, you can do this? And I was like, oh, seriously? People? Because I actually
I'm not pulling rank, but I
showed...
did use it. I did use Unvalidate in my first video on my first channel. I'm just saying.
It's reset. It wasn't the Unvalidate thing. It was reset. People didn't know about reset.
Right.
I actually want to bring up a point of contention here. I'm on Jason's side, specifically because reset is only called when you manually invoke it or when you add something new. And the hidden in Specter means you can't actually know if something is serialized properly or not. If it becomes unreferenced by any means and you can't see it, and then it starts invoking errors because the reference is not assigned or it's assigned to something wrong, you're screwed.
But this, for one, I don't usually hide the inspector for those particular components. I usually leave it open because it enables me to use those components elsewhere where they might not be on the same thing as what the other component is looking for is on. So I don't use the hide inspector. The other thing is the validate function. I try to keep where it's not actually changing anything. It's just validating what I've done. So I'm validating the component itself. I don't change the component, add to the component, do anything with the component. I enable it to have fixed options. So my validate highlights something that says you haven't done this right. And then there's a little button that says fix now, if that's possible to automate that thing. And usually that will do something like the get component.
I'm a lot more militant. I treat Unvalidate as a, batteries included magic fix. One of the most common ones I'll do is I have a transform owner, which is thing to use for this script. And if it's null, it uses itself. It'll just be nope, it has to have a thing in there. If you're not going to put something in there, we'll use ourselves as an example just to make sure that something is there. So I will always make sure everything is in my dependencies chain is filled in where possible, with the exception of a custom editor where I'll actually highlight it in red and go, you need to fix this, here's a button. But if I'm doing a normal script, I will make sure that all valid values are assigned where possible. And then if it can't work, I will actively have the script shut itself off on awake, going, this isn't configured correctly, go figure this out, But I'm very militant with that stuff.
Do you talk about like making an attribute, or how do you do that? Because that's a great, like on validate I get, but are you using like a custom attribute to do that and marking?
Yeah. So I have an attribute just called required, and then I'll do a and it's literally just a keyword, and then I can just do a find all, because then find all of type is fine in the editor, right? So you can find all the things and get the attributes, and then do a check, and then you can run it either just before build or compile, and that way you can basically say, oh, these aren't configured, so there's no point in you pressing play, going through the process, and it'll break. It's already going to be null, so
Do you guys use serialize fields and you create a script, add serialize field, and set it up in the script with prefab before you put it on the scene? Do you use that feature?
That's another good one to point out. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize this. Like when you can actually set up in the scripts or the prefabs in the actual asset folder defaults for things, and so when they drag in, they'll use those defaults.
To clarify, if you look in the project view and you click on a scripts file and it's a mono behavior or a scriptable object or a Unity engine.object referencing kind of class, you will actually see references to assignable serializable things. And if you assign anything in there, it's going to be the default assignment for whenever you add that component through the editor. Important. Because if you add component via code, I don't think this actually applies. So
yeah, I don't think so. I haven't tried that.
Through the code, no. But it's very useful for also shaders because you can set up shaders with the base textures and stuff like that, and they work with the code. So if you have a shader set up with textures and then create in code material with that shader, it's set up with all the textures already. It's useful when you want to use, for example, some debug materials or something like that in editor.
Okay, wait. They are running on the same system, so maybe something I said was wrong here. Because if the shaders work, the scripts.
The shaders work. The shaders work 100%. Yeah, because
wait. How do you create the shader? Do you use like instantiate or shader, or find type and then
shader is shader find? Yeah, you can't instantiate.
Yeah, shader. So shader.find finds the object of the shader. It's a different thing from adding component.
Yeah,
which is,
yeah. That's why it uses something different, but that's very useful feature.
Well, one of my favorite examples of that actually is someone mentioned earlier the concept of blackboarding. And well, if you've got a scriptable object that represents some shared data, you can just place it in. Like for a common thing is like if you have some sort of event callback or a high score something system or event system or something, you can make the scriptable object and then assign it in all the various scripts that would need it, so people don't have to figure out, wait, what's the object? Because sometimes there's literally one object. There's one instance of one thing that a bunch of scripts need to reference, and it just makes it easier for your team to just kind of drop script and magically connect. Now again, my solution to that tends to be, if it's not there, I'll do it for you in the onValidate, because I like to be extra careful, but that will also work.
There's something I wanted to point out earlier, and I was kind of laughing beside myself as we were talking about all the nitty-gritty. But for everybody concerned about how much we care about automating assignment of a single reference on a script, it's about doing things when you want to do them, not when you don't want to do them. Because every time you have to do something else to get to the point of doing whatever you wanted, it's friction. And friction demoralizes, it wastes time, it ruins focus. Imagine if you wanted to have a slice of cake, but you had to go baking the cake, or somebody just bought a cake and put it in the fridge for you. That's like the difference here. What Jason, what David do is save you the time and just put cakes in your fridge.
And honestly, like the real reason for me isn't
I'm
even
using salads. I'm using salads.
Sure.
I don't do cakes.
Nice.
I don't like salad.
But
they're good for you, which is why it's better.
I've seen you code.
I know. I like my food Italian. Lots of spaghetti in there.
Well, in my case, the truth is it's less about the like saving a few seconds. It is, and I think we've all been there, where you're trying to debug something, where you basically press play, you go through a whole pile of stuff, and it takes you 5 or 10 minutes, and you realize, oh, the transform field is null in that one thing, or that one particular reference. But because you were being clever, you put a if not null or whatever somewhere, so the code didn't explode, it just didn't do what you expected it to. And so now you're debugging for ages going, why isn't the logic working? And it's because something wasn't auto-assigned. So the auto-assignment for me isn't about the like performance thing, it is about I call it batteries included. The default state of affairs should work roughly as assumed, and if not, then obviously log in messages afterwards.
There
Yeah.
is something here that I wanted to say regarding batteries included. There is something that I hate about the Unity editor right now. The debug is not attached to the editor by default. And this is like a huge time drain whenever you're actually trying to debug something, because you can't just put a breakpoint and expect that to be run. You have to actually manually attach debugger and then run the application to reach that point.
It's funny you said I actually use it a lot less than I should for that very reason. That little bit of friction you're describing is enough of me going, I'll just run it a few times, and I would use it more if it was
spaceship
automatic.
on that key. I put a speeder right there. My little Star Wars speeder for debugging.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring that up because in Terraria I use breakpoints like way more, and I noticed like the actual decline ever since it like stopped being a default feature, because back in earlier Unity versions they just do it for you, but then I realized like, oh, the editor actually runs faster if you don't use debug mode, so only enter it if you have to. But like this makes it way harder to actually want to use this feature because it doesn't work like by default, and there's the process of like detaching, attaching. If you're using Rider, it's actually slower for some reason than Visual Studio. I don't know why. That's like, I don't want to wait 10 seconds to start activating this feature, or like I think it was 40 seconds at one time on a specific project.
Whew.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. I had a stop. I started watching a YouTube video. Before I knew it, I lost 6 minutes because like by the time it finished, I was already engaged in something else. I don't need that when I'm developing.
That's a straight. Yeah, I get like a 1 second delay on mine usually. I hit F5 and then I'm in and it just works. It attaches on almost everything. It's really fast. Yeah, I'm using Rider and now I'm in the EAP. Let's see. Yeah, it's pretty snappy to switch in and out.
I'm gonna follow up with you on that. There is absolutely something different in what we were discussing.
I mean, I've had scenarios in the past where it did take forever or just didn't attach, but lately I haven't had that issue at all. It's been pretty fast and snappy and always attaching.
You sometimes, if Unity's crashed or anything like that, you get like a legacy Unity process running in the background on Windows, and then when you go to attach, it won't attach, and you're like, why is it not attached? It's because it won't find the right one. So you have to. There's another option in Visual Studio where you debug and you can attach the process, and it just you can find the Unity processes there and attach to it. Super annoying. I usually just close everything down and then reboot it all up, and then like, yeah, okay, there we go. There's also a little button in the corner, the bottom right-hand corner of Unity for debugging, which nobody ever uses. Yeah,
Rider used to have a pop-up to show the Unity editor versions too, but I'm not seeing that anymore. It just has one. It doesn't show it for selecting. So, or maybe it just moved because the UI is different too. That could be the case.
Oh yeah, something small regarding multiplayer play mode. Because I use Rider, the consoles for the extra editors, because they're a separate application assembly instance, if you try to click anything in the console log there, it will open the same Rider solution on that file, but it's no longer the same solution. So you can't
a new instance of it.
Yeah, but it treats the files as if that's generated.
Yeah.
So you can't change anything, and then I have to close Rider and reopen it. That's like the one thing I have to be careful of. So I like almost want to disable logging, but I know I need the logging, so it's kind of
It seems like something to report to them and let them fix real quick. I would imagine they'd jump on that pretty quick. They seem to be pretty heavy on that integration. Before we go on, I did want to mention the validator stuff. I pulled it up because I'm talking about all this validation, and for the last couple of weeks, I've been using it somewhat heavily as a kind of a replacement. I always wrote on validates that would fill things too, but now I found that since I started diving into and actually using Validator, I just add in a fix instead. I just do like a validate with a fix, and the fix button just auto fixes it. So then it just will fix across all scenes if something goes wrong, something breaks. And it's basically the same code, just writing it in a slightly different place outside of the onValidate and being able to scan across. But the thing that I really liked about it, I've written a couple custom validators, but largely just the built-in attribute stuff, which does, some of the stuff that you guys were talking about earlier, but like the key things I use are like, child game object only to make sure that it's there, plus the required attribute, because they don't add a required attribute. It uses the same built-in one, but then it actually pops up and you can add a fix for it. and have it add in that missing component. So they've got attributes that are built in and do that. But if you haven't tried it, it's my new default.
You should probably explain what it is first. I don't think a lot of people have seen this or how it works. So if you haven't seen it, it's from the same people who do Odin and Specter, that all of the fancy Unity upgraded editor, effectively. This validator function is a separate window that acts like like someone's monitoring your code, and it's got rules. You write rules in. And
not your code, your project.
Your project, yes, that's fair. Because it can work with all your editor stuff too. And it will then run these rules and gives you validations that you can then perform. It's really handy for things like my favorite example from their own tutorials was the stuff that, like, if you have trees that are clipping or not touching the ground or something, you can put rules in that say these should always be grounded or something. And you can have these interesting rules that'll kind of extend past just the code. But to the point, you were asking about this before, Jason. I really want to use it. I really like what it does, and the fact it's also really performant. Like, credit to the team because it's asynchronous. It's really fast in how it processes like a lot of stuff. But the problem is it's a very buy-in heavy system. It is like it's like having a test suite or a validation system. It's not just like a passive thing that you'd run. It's like you need engagement from the team. And if you do that, you can write really custom stuff. Like, our system requires that these things must be in these places, and you can get really granular with it. But I've had a very hard time with tools like this, where you have to get a bunch of people to all accept, understand, and learn a tool like this, which is my problem. It's almost too good. It's too comprehensively a big system. It's not just like a mild plug-in into Unity.
That's interesting. That was kind of my first thought about it too when I was first diving into it. And then after I've been using it kind of for a while though in these projects, what I think would probably actually happen is that even without the full buy-in, you're still going to be finding like constant issues that picks up, especially if you have game designers on your project. Because the main thing that I think this is super useful for is catching those errors that the design team, or sometimes it is programmer, but I like to blame the designers, that the design team made, where they lost some prefab reference, or they changed some value outside of the actual acceptable bounds, don't realize that they've done it and then checked that in. It happens all the fucking time, and it's like it's one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with, is like designers accidentally putting in bad data and then pushing that data out because you're just not literally watching and checking all that. At least as the scale of things go up, it's very hard to keep a close eye on all that stuff and keep people from breaking stuff. Plus, I feel like it just stop the designer when the designers break stuff. If it can pop up validate and there's an auto fix button that will just fix it for them. Like one of the validators I created for my project just resets my game manager that's set in all of my scenes. So the simple game manager is just there in case I want to quick load from a scene. So if I don't want to go through my normal flow, and all it does is make sure that all of those are actually matching the existing prefab, that they're reverted to the latest version of it. They don't have any overrides or anything screwed up on them, because it constantly happens. I'm going in, changing things, messing around, and then forget, and then save it. And so it's been really helpful for me for that. And I feel like from the start, it just found stuff, especially if you pull in asset pack projects, it finds all kinds of stuff, problems on there like duplicate colliders and missing scripts, bad layers, all kinds of stuff. So I don't know. I found it a lot more versatile than I expected. Initially, I was thinking, more like it's got to be this full buy-in, but it really is kind of lightweight, and it doesn't really add anything heavy to the project until other than if you start dropping in attributes. So I don't know. That was my overview kind of thought of it. I'm working on a video on it, so it's very, very fresh in my head.
The one thing that I would like to caution about why this stuff's actually useful in an intuitive sense is people lose context a lot when they're working. They try to do what they want to do. They don't think about the context of the entire project. This is something that I learned with Terraria, having 5,000 items. Sometimes you will address the one thing that is giving you a problem right now, and you're like, okay, change made, problem fixed. You didn't consider the context of everything that moved. If you have a mountain and the peak of that mountain is just slightly too low so that you can see a tree in the distance, and you like raise the mountain a tiny bit. You're like, okay, yeah, problem fixed. All the trees, all the objects that you had on the mountain did not move along with it, so now they're slightly stuck into the mountain, and like the boxes are in the floor, and you can't access the boxes, and you can't see the landmarks, etc. This is the kind of stuff that helps you. It cleans up after you. This is like having a helpful friend that watches you as you litter the floor and literally picks things up and tells you, hey, I don't know where to put this, handle it, or I'll just handle it, like put it back in place. You almost broke this, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's two very good examples of that in the project I'm currently working on. One of them is there's lots of grabbable objects, and we're using the Oculus runtime for that. And so Oculus has their own scripts for grabbable stuff, and then we have our scripts for ID management and whatever. So it needs both. And so people will often put one and forget the other. Or the other example is if you put a prefab in the resources folder with the intent of instantiating it at runtime, we're using a dependency injection framework. And so in order to retain the references being injected, there's a thing called a Zen auto injector you have to put on objects that are instantiated at runtime. And that's, again, nobody knows to do that unless you understand the system. And so being able to just have it go, oh no, we'll just add that for you because it's missing. And it is required if it happens to be in this folder. Those kinds of systemic rules at an application level are very helpful because it means you can cut down on the amount of stuff, you know.
That last link that Jason actually popped up was a video that I did on presets, which helps.
That's this one in the chat.
Talking about here. Yeah.
And I didn't know about the window, by the way. Like, I knew presets from the little button, but I hadn't known about the other configuration rule stuff. That was new to me when I saw that. So.
There's also scene templates, which I've been thinking of doing a video on as well. Because I know a lot of people do like testing scenes and they do levels and they do this sort of stuff, but you could just have a template and start building off that rather than the copy and paste job that I see. I see lots of people copy, paste, delete the stuff in there, start carrying on with it. And again, you can miss those things out.
The one thing that you need to show them is the editor for UI scene template, that literally just including a canvas so people can actually see their UI elements in.
Oh yeah, good. Yes, thank you for UI elements. That's one that like I've had so many people go, oh my god, that's it's so handy. Because for people who don't know, if you open a prefab and it's a UI element, it just opens up in a scene and it's like, I'm not even on a canvas. I have no scale. Good luck trying to figure out how to customize this. You can decide what that is. You can make a scene which is like my default resolution, my default canvas is, my default setup. And so whenever you open up a UI element, it'll place it onto a virtual canvas for that testing. It is mandatory if you're doing any prefab work with a UI element, which most people don't know about.
Yeah, this is like one of the things in Unity that I am mad that they didn't just include a default asset for this for you. Like
it should, like just a standard 1080, you know, even if it's just scaled. Yeah.
Like I to be clear, I don't want them to include a default scene that you can't edit. I want them to include an asset of your default template scenes just in your project, and in your project just assign them empty scenes, doesn't matter. Heck, have the main camera, what is it, the post-processing volume, and the what's the third thing? There's always 3 objects when you make a new scene.
Directional light.
Yes. Just include those 3 in a scene. That's the new scene button. Like it creates a copy of this. Just do that, and you're like 10 steps ahead of where you were.
Oh, actually, sorry. Here's one thing. We haven't had the tip section in a while, but there's a tip that absolutely just made my life so much easier that I have to share. Ever since Unity have started adding a whole bunch of new features, there's a bunch of really stupid, small, annoying things that have crept up. One of them being a bunch of namespaces with similarly named classes. Numerics.vector3, for example. So the amount of times you try to write vector3 and it's like, oh, do you mean this one that's got nothing to do with anything we're doing? It's like, no, I don't mean that one. I mean the one that I'm still using in the class at the moment. So what you can do is if you, in Writer, you can go to auto import, it's a section, and you can put in namespaces and say, stop suggesting these. I won't want these as my default suggestions. So I've trimmed out a bunch of the ones that like that classic problem of, oh, do you mean system random or do you mean Unity random? If I mean system random, I will write system.random. Presume I mean Unity random. So like all of these little things I've locked in now, so I'm not getting these constant like you accidentally press a button and get like that the X object mobile something import thrown in at the top of your script. So The auto import section in Writer doesn't
like an
import.
Random.
Spell check.
Random's the one. Always happens to me on random. You type random and it's like fully qualify. Random, fully qualify. Random, fully qualify. It's like, oh, seriously.
Oh, well, I think we should take this question from Richard, but before we do, I forgot. I wanted to pop this up. If I can find the link here, where did it just go? Oh man, how did I lose that? I literally just created a link and it didn't pop up in the bottom of my list like I wanted it to. Anyway, we'll just go on to the question and I'll share the link afterwards. It was a free asset that I figured everybody might want to go grab. So Richard asked, do you have an opinion on the application of test-driven development? Is it worth the extra overhead? And do you see any practical use for it with respect to games development in Unity? So is anybody doing TDD? Do you guys all like test-driven stuff? Do you like any unit tests, any test automation at all? Your eye looks to have some strong thoughts here. So
I had a perfect example until you said under Unity. So League of Legends, made by Riot Games, actually has a development blog where the engineers literally talk about how they construct the game, the classes, projectiles, etc. And they talked about their testing. And because their game has a lot of mechanical interactions, and there are a lot of spaghetti bugs because everything is a minion, they actually have a test runner that spins up characters in specific configurations and makes sure that things happen as they should. And they talked about how this actually works in detail. So they use not necessarily test-driven development, but they run tests, and a lot of them. And from what I am understanding, they started using tests as they are making the characters to make sure that everything that they do never breaks everything that from running as it should, which is something that I would caution against when you're working on a game that you're going to have to keep supporting forever, because whenever you make a change and it's an integration test, meaning a test that makes sure everything runs together properly, features are going to change, and then your tests are going to change as well. You're adding extra work on top of the work that you already have. Usually testing that units work is far more reliable, because once a unit works, you don't have to deal with it ever again. Most units don't change after their inception. It's the interaction between those units that do. So for unit testing, driven development, writing out all the methods, then filling them in to make sure that the tests actually run as they should, perfectly fine, fair game. I am less a fan of integration testing. This is my own opinion. And
yeah, I kind of agree. And on the integration testing, I prefer things like Game Driver, Selenium, that are actually just going to go through and play your game or use your web page and go through that full process. I also feel like you do end up doing a lot less rewriting with those, because they're using that top layer in the interface that your players are actually using to go through the game. So things don't change nearly as much, and you can do some simple rules that aren't likely to change and make sure that the whole flow is kind of working without. I wouldn't do that in writing my own integration tests outside of a tool like this.
The other thing that I want to caution against with integration testing, specifically in Unity, is that when you have a component and you want to test its interaction with another component, Unity does have a play mode testing system where you actually enter play mode, you run the simulation as you should, etc., etc. The problem with it is that most people would either try to manually construct the objects, which do not represent the final state of what something is. In the test, you may have had the perfect working interaction, but the state of the actual game object in the actual gameplay changed, and now things break. That is what you actually want to test. So you actually have to do a whole asset loading thing, run the thing, etc., etc. This process is slow. With game objects, I'm just literally not a fan of how this works at all. Cleanups, etc., all tedious. You don't necessarily know if everything is going to run. You may have leaked objects from the last test. You spot a projectile and you forgot to remove it. Your code also changes to accommodate those tests, because it doesn't have a full testing suite like pure C#. So the quality of life is just way too low to actually accommodate this, as far as I'm concerned. With dots, this actually changes a bit, because in dots you can actually create worlds in edit mode, and you can call update on them, and you know that the whole world is actually updating. So you don't have to spin up like a whole application. You can just spin up a world, include an entity inside it, and there is a baking process now. So ahead of like compilation, prepares the entity for you. It's actually pretty amazing. You can just have a world entity, run the test for like whatever set of updates that you need, and you control the delta time because you pass it in when you do the update. There is like no magic systems because this is dots. This is clean, and this is way better, but it's still dots. So
Yeah, I do think on the unit testing side, my opinion is that unit tests in general are like diet and exercise. They're pretty universally good for you as long as you're not stupid about them. But like everyone knows you should probably do something like it. It's just usually too much effort or work. The real trade-off for me, though, comes down to the fact that Unity, we talked about the conflict of compilation. The number one thing is like I love doing tests and I will do tests in my C# code all of the time. But the fact is that when you have to reload the domain and do anything, like the fact that like if you change a semicolon and then go back to the Unity editor, and before I can even run my unit tests, I have to wait until Unity has rebuilt all of the code that represents every DLL in my project. Like that defeats the entire premise of unit testing, which is meant to be discrete, fast, red-green refactor cycles. So as I've said before, if it's code, if it's just code where I'm doing like an event system for an inventory or a shop logic or something that can be pretty discreetly explained as money goes in, item leaves inventory, whatever rules can be defined in very clear, non-rigid body, non-collidery ways, I will write that code in a DLL, I will write unit tests for it, and I will, red, green, refactor those very, very quickly without even touching the Unity editor. And then I will have that DLL auto-drop itself in with MS Build or something. That's very rare because there's very few systems these days which, like, if as a contractor, I can do like a single system and like build a system and have it auto-drop in and then deliver a DLL to somebody. But it's a lot harder in a game where you've got like multiple people working on systems. They don't want to go into the code and see 3 DLLs and then can't edit it themselves, right? So it gets messier unless you've got buy-in from a whole team. And again, goes back to the problem I have with these tools is that there's a lot of really good processes I would love to set up in ideal circumstances, but I find in reality when you're working with people, you just have to do what makes sense to get as much work done in the practical time.
Also, you made me laugh imagining that, like, when you use the diet and exercise thing, I'm like imagining you cutting all the food like in neat packages and just giving it to somebody like, here is an easy diet.
Single responsibility, just.
That's how my wife does it. She's got everything packaged up. Just grab and go. Oh, so there were actually 2 things I wanted to talk about. I forgot before we go. 2 other things I wanted. Oh, Harrison, did you have more to talk about on the TDD though?
Oh, I was just gonna say, totally forgot. I like TDD just because it helps me think from like backwards. So like I don't use it, like you said, I don't use it for interaction. I barely use it for UI, but I do it for features that I might not like know all of the steps first. It just helps me think of the end goal, and it makes it like instead of just commenting or like stubbing out a file with what you want to do, you actually have to write tests and like asserts. And I'm like, oh, that makes it really concrete in my mind when I'm like, okay, I need this value to be this value, and I'm going to work backwards. How do I get that? Like that to me helps in situations where I don't know like A to B every step of the way. But I mean, everyone covered everything else I was going to say. Like it's a lovely ideal. And I think the only thing that's weird about it is that like, this is one of those other bigger things, the split between learning, going to Unity first or like traditional computer science, because computer science will get you to TDD and unit testing way faster than Unity. And if you ever get there at all, unless you're in a really good firm that actually imposes, a test suite, like you might go a really long time in your career without knowing that there are all these methodologies for making your games testable, like not just perform it, but like, that you can run a test suite, push it out, and like have that be somewhat automated. But yeah, I just like it.
I can't think of anywhere I've been that actually enforced it where it wasn't me more pushing it than
right? Because it never happened. It's always seems to go, please just do it. It would be so good. And it's like, no, can't, no buy-in.
Yeah. There is actually something interesting in this regard. I helped a few friends recently try to get jobs as programmers. One of them, a game developer, tried to apply to a game development company, and they sent him a practical test. And in this practical test, they gave him a Unity package, and that Unity package also included code and they asked him to implement a certain simple game. And for that simple game, they wanted him to have unit tests that cover basic functionality such as A, B, and C. And he didn't know what testing is.
Right?
Oh,
Like that's
did you
a big
teach him?
skill that you miss.
Yeah, so we had a whole go about this is what you do, this is how you do it in Unity. This is, you need to understand that this is not the standard way of doing this. Unity has their own stuff. And also, what is the premise of testing? Testing means that you run every single line of code to make sure that it runs as it should, which means your tests have to cover different cases, which implies that you are testing for actual code coverage, which means people already made tools to save you time on that, and you should know those tools exist and not just imagine things.
That being said, honestly, I'm very much of the pick your battles perspective.
Yeah.
And here's my litmus test. It's not tests, it's not unit tests, none of that stuff. It's 99.9% of Unity developers out there, I guarantee you, don't understand what system.lowercase object is and how it relates to the other structured systems. Like, if you can tell
I'm
me
just
the
waiting for
relationship
them to start typing LOWER case object. start searching for it.
like, if you can tell me the relationship between mono behavior and system.object, then we're in a good space. But I think a lot of this stuff starts from there up, because if you don't understand what inheritance is, you don't understand what a hash code is, you don't understand what equality means from a reference equality versus value equality, these are so fundamental to like 99% of all coding stuff that by the time you get to continuous integration, unit test, suite, system, whatever, we're like, you know, that's a different universe. Let's start with understanding the difference between casting and like covariance and contravariance. If you can, if we can get there, we can then work on the other stuff later.
This reminds me of one thing, though. I just want to add on to what Yorai was saying about this test here, and they want unit tests for it. In my opinion, if you're doing like a code test for a job position, if it's possible to write tests around that, you should almost always do that anyway, because then you're making sure that you're covering all of the cases of the things that they actually wanted you to cover, and checking for errors. And it also gives them a quick way to validate and see what you've covered, why you've covered it, and check to see that your code actually works without having to logically think through it. I think it makes it a little bit easier. But largely, the biggest thing is that it helps you make sure that you catch the weird edge cases and stuff, because you can run through it and they're like, okay, it passes everywhere. Oh, it fails on this one thing. I missed this one requirement that was in the instructions, so now I need to go back and add that. You get that kind of that extra verification. But I also think it probably goes a long way for just showing the people that you're applying that you also know how to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's more than just showing that you know how to do it. If you weren't asked for this and you still did it, this shows reliability. You made sure that even without you present, the code checks itself to see if it runs.
Yeah.
There's also, as a complete side note, there's also the documentation aspect. Like, as someone who has been a contractor on so many projects, and the fact that test suites are never there, and if they are there, they're like ancient or whatever. The rare cases you get a good test suite on something that's actually active, it is better than any shadowing any developer, because you can go in and have an assumption and go, I think it should do this in this scenario, and you look for the test that says, when this scenario, this should happen. And you can go, okay, that gives me a much better understanding of the presumptions of what the system should or shouldn't do. And the best thing is if you want to test those assumptions, you can read the existing tests, write your own test, and verify that the output is what you expect it to be, which is a really great way to poke a system. It's even better if you use something like fluent assertions and other sort of more declarative ways of writing your tests, where when I write unit tests, they literally say, create a substitute for something and then set the value to this when this should be this. And you press go and it returns a checkbox. And you're like, cool, so if I want to test, if I give it this number, it should be this. Oh, good, it is that number. So now I understand the system better. It's far better than reading a lot of documentation. Not all of it, but there's a lot of bad documentation out there. And being able to see the code run and like poke it and see what happens is better than most kinds of documentation, I think.
Dave, do you have the thought on this one? You look like you're deep in thought. It's like, no. Screw unit tests.
Yeah, so it's actually probably mentionable. Terraria doesn't have unit tests for most features, mainly because we have so many classes. The classes are gigantic. There's a lot of world context. We don't have a way to mock the world. The game is big. We have one class with 50,000 lines in it.
Adding
that's
unit
it.
tests after is almost always a nightmare, nearly impossible.
Yeah, so we are fine as we are because the game has been like vetted by so many players, and this is something that you should make note of. Even though unit testing is healthy for you, sometimes it's not worth the extra work if you're just trying to get some things done. If you have a testing force to make sure that the experience that most people have is going to be perfectly okay, you don't necessarily need it. If you are working on something for medical purposes, it's like non-negotiable. Everybody needs to have the best experience. But if you are working on just an entertainment experience, aka game, which is something I wanted to bring up earlier when you said games are narratives, in my opinion, they're just applications made for entertainment or programs specifically. By program, I don't mean like computer code. I mean like an actual instruction set by which at the end you're supposed to derive entertainment. With all of that said, you don't necessarily need unit tests, especially if you're making an entertainment product. It's going to...
Well, to be fair, you have the one thing that's better than unit tests, the only thing in the world better than unit tests, which is a sea of angry people with strong opinions. Like, that is literally the only thing better.
No, I have fear of sea of angry people because I do all the testing. Like,
So,
yeah,
go on. Finish your thought.
I just wanted to say that, like, you need to deliver a good experience to people, which means you have to test everything that can go wrong before it reaches the people, which means sometimes manual testing, because experience testing can't be substituted with a code. Like, you don't have code that derives, this is a good experience, this is a worse experience than before, this is a better experience than now. You have to constantly do that. Terraria goes through a ton of iterations before things actually reach release state, because I care, because I want to maintain like the above 95% positive reviews rate. I want people to have a good time. I don't want anybody to have a bad time. If I have any qualms about a piece of content that's about to arrive or a change to a system that's about to arrive, I am making sure this is eliminated, curved out, removed from existence. I don't even want people to have a whiff of what shit has gone down.
But that's what I mean. Like, I wasn't even meaning when I say it. Like, the reason people use unit tests, the point of it is code coverage. It is to test scenarios and use cases. The only thing better than writing a suite of tests that verify each line of code is ran is throwing thousands and thousands of people at it to do all the scenarios that the code won't do. So I really mean it. Like, it's not just from a code perspective. It's people are going to do the things that you may not think of doing. It's the whole zombie test scenario thing. So that is legitimately better. If you have access to a community of people, that's always going to be the best form of testing you will ever get. Second to that will be testing every line of code and then moving on to other formats.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, like, the beta testers have been invaluable. We run beta tests, we run like runs with them, we discuss things out, we ask them how they're feeling about the state of the game, like with regards to new content. They give helpful feedback. Like, it is invaluable. I appreciate them like a whole lot there. I'm not necessarily like the one most upfront involved with them, but I am making sure that like those things are taken into account. We let them have access to the ticketing system to actually write like their own opinions on things. Yeah. Involve your testers, by the way. They're not second. How do you call it? Second seat.
Second class citizens.
Yeah, they're not second class citizens. They like treat them well. They are the people who actually have to deal with everything that you put out. If you are having fun writing a system, maybe nobody has fun interacting with it. They are the people who are going to be able to like assess that and tell you, and you need to respect them for it. Because when a kid cooks a bad meal, they may be happy with it. They had a fun cooking process. They don't have to taste. The person who has the taste has to, like, you may be poisoning them. You have to make sure you give them the utmost respect.
That's why I developed Poison Simulator number 5. Anyway, so the only thing I was gonna point out is I put up a link earlier. I was at a talk with NVIDIA this week, and they were showing NVIDIA VR capture, or VCR is what they call it. And what you can do if you've built VR games, like I have a lot of VR games, when you're trying to test VR, you're constantly putting on the headset, taking off the headset, putting on the headset, making sure Steam is running. Steam's crashed. It's a nightmare. This basically substitutes you having to do that. You can actually record yourself completely, playing the experience in multiple ways, and then it will replay that in your game. So it emulates you and the hardware not in the game, but it emulates the input from the hardware to your game itself and then runs that. And you can send in different commands to move the person around and all the rest that's actually playing back. So you can actually play your game completely in VR all the way through the whole thing 10 times. And then when you're at testing, you can go, okay, let's test, and just run yourself playing all those 10 plays again, just literally as an emulation in virtual reality, which is amazing. The other cool thing they showed is you can go in, and if you're doing a multiplayer environment, for instance, they show a car. What you can do is you can actually do VCR, run yourself, opening the car door, getting in the car, waving and all the rest, and then do another one where you're around the back of the car, opening the boot or trunk or whatever the hell Americans want to call it, and then playing around in there and closing it and all the rest. You can then overlay all those again as a multiplayer environment in VR.
Wow.
So you don't have to have, if you're doing a VR multiplayer game, it's the biggest nightmare for testing because you have to have everybody with a VR headset, everybody doing all the thing. You don't have to worry about that because you could just literally record yourself and then pop yourself as instances with VCR. It's an amazing tool for if you're doing VR testing. So I thought I wanted to point that one out.
Very fair. I do want to point out you don't actually necessarily need this. What you are actually describing is like just standard object recording, right? Like there isn't a special feature compared to a recording of any type of input.
I've written quite a few recording things where I record myself in the Unity editor and then it plays it back. In fact, I just done a game jam 2-3 weeks ago where I built a recording system so that I would do an action and then a robot would perform that action when I stopped recording. I kind of failed on the game jam because I got well into making these recording tools. And then I was like, oh, if I had a level editor for this, I built an entire level editor. I was like, oh yeah, I only had 3 days to work on this and everybody else has a 7. And I've built a level editor.
I think the game jam achieved its goal. It achieved its goal. You had fun. You did what you learned a lot.
I absolutely hated it. So no, I did have fun. But yeah, so I've done all that. The nice thing about this one is you can record the emulation part of it is quite big when it comes to, because I could do all the recording and multiplayer and all the rest of it. Having all those emulations running, it's real input. You've got timing issues and stuff like that. But yeah, there's both, best of both worlds. When I did a game, I did Robo and Bobo way back in the day. This is freaking Unity 3 or something, and it had. You basically put in commands and the robot would perform those commands to get his teddy bear. And then we ripped the teddy bear out of his arms and said, right, now the next level. So you would say, right, jump, move around. Yeah, I'm twisted. And then you get pushed off the thing. But it had 100 levels with all these different puzzles. Now, to play that through every time would be a nightmare. We always did, before we released, we always played it manually. But what we also did in Unity is just basically write a bit of code that said, play this playback. And then it would give us a debug log of this level failed, this level worked, this level failed, this level worked. It's not hard to do. If you write your functionality on your objects to enable you to play them in an auto or a bot style way, you can save yourself a lot of time as well. So it's higher than unit tests and all the rest, obviously, because unit tests are right down there.
But again, in terms of pick your battle, let's start with getting people being able to play their game from any scene. Let's start there. I know you've got a video on that very topic, but that's that's already step one. Let's get there first.
I'm not going to go and find it. It's there. There is a video on my channel. Watch every video on the channel, and you'll come across it.
Yeah, just go watch them all.
Yeah, just watch them all. You'll be a much better developer. In fact, you'll be so good. But yeah, there's a video on literally from a level being able to just press play and play the level, and it uses some funky techniques you might not know.
Powell is already in the level the entire time, and we just haven't been paying attention.
I want to quickly.
I'm just glad Paul put the fire out. That's all I'm going to say, because it was looking pretty rough before. So it's nice and foresty now, which is nice.
Safe.
You can see. Look, he's looking. He's going to turn. Yeah, there you go. You can see him doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one last thing on the unit testing too, is that the one place that I think there's really strong argument for using it is when you're doing a big refactor on a system. If you can test it before, if you can write tests that prove what it does, and then refactor it, and then those tests still pass. That's always, in my opinion, super helpful because it helps me avoid fucking up my system when I refactor things and missing some edge case or something, or just totally missing some key feature of it when I'm doing that migration. So I find that to be super useful, like part of being able to do like a big refactor when it's not something that I can easily guarantee in my head is going to be pretty straightforward. So. All right. I think we're almost out of time. I wanted to mention a couple other things too. First was this free TV studio. I don't know if you guys seen this. They do like a
Jason,
yeah.
there's a problem on Asset Store.
What's the problem?
It links to the studio, but you should get mountain forest trunks and roots. Look at the text. Yeah, I voted to Asset Store team. There's a big error. Yeah, because if you go to the publisher sale, you see mountain forest trunks and roots, and it's by Greenworks. If you click get your gift, it takes to
it's going to the wrong one. I didn't even notice that. Oh, wow. That is awesome. So yes, the actual one, you got to go. Where's the actual? Let me find the actual mountain forest trunks and roots. That's hilarious. The link on the asset store is mistaken. So it's this
people
one
are
right.
already going for it. They're going. We've got people in
So
the
as
wrong place.
So as we
Everybody's
were
going to
saying,
grab
as we were saying, testing is very important when you're developing things.
No, you don't need any tests at all.
Yeah.
For product releases.
Oh, and I'll let the assets. I will message them and let them know.
Yeah,
What
I
an important
figured
asset
it
that
out
is.
yesterday because I clicked on the button to get free, and it moved to asset that I already had.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Okay. Well, I
I
dropped
love that.
the link in
It's-
chat
it's-
for people to go grab the correct one.
It's the classic life imitates art, right? Just perfect timing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now chat is the analog. Just go to the analog. Don't do the QR code. Just go to the chat.
All right, the other thing I wanted to mention was the AI conference that's coming up. So it's end of next month. It's free. Just go register it's now just on the Game Dev Guild site on the main page. You can just go there, click it, get the free pass, register, and then I don't know. I think we have. Is the schedule up? It's not up yet. The schedule will probably be coming up soon with the talks. There's quite a few interest sessions. It's all just AI stuff that's actionable though. So it's trying to be talks on things that are AI use that you can actually use in your own game development stuff. So if you're interested, go check that out too. What's up,
I forgot to bring up something that I wanted to talk about real bad at the start.
Well, let's do it now before we go.
So when I mentioned
1
I
minute.
tried .NET, when I tried .NET Code, they have a specific feature that the regular networking for game objects does not have, which is thin clients. Thin clients are literally a set of client simulation that includes absolutely nothing but sending inputs to the server. So your real client can see, oh, this is how it looks with 100 players when you don't have 100 players. And instead of running 100 client simulations, it's literally just one dummy object that says, hey, I'm a client to the server. Look, I'm sending inputs. And it doesn't do the whole simulation. It's freaking fast. The .NET Code has a literal 1 line of code method and a 0 line of code method where you can just open an editor and set how many thin clients you want. You press play, it immediately works. It's just a fantastic experience. It's absolutely unusable by default. I had to go to the forums and ask the developers, hey, how do I actually use this properly? And they answered very nicely, and they're improving this. They're also improving the documentation as per my request. So yay, really good stuff. And this is good for testing as well. This is how you test heavy load. Am I under 1 minute?
No,
I think so.
When did I fail?
1 minute ago.
Yeah. That was good. Oh, there's Corvallis. You got to come on next week. Talk more about this AI stuff. I want to talk about the Steam AI ban stuff too sometime. I want to find out more info. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what's going on there and what they're actually planning and doing. But yeah, it seems like an interesting one, at least for me. I don't know. All right, anybody got
an AI? They've developed an AI to find any AI that will need to be banned.
Oh, is it just auto bans AIs?
Is it called Blade Runner? Because that seems like...
Yeah, good man. Good man.
Cool. Well, anybody got any other things you want to mention, talk about before we go?
No.
All right. Well, I guess with that, we'll head out and see y'all next week. Please hit the thumbs up. Go check out the links. Go grab Greg's game. He's not here anymore, but he'll be back, and make sure you grab some Nature Manufacture assets. And I guess we will see you next Friday. So thanks again, everybody. See you later. Bye.
Bye.